Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 126th meeting of the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. I'm going to call the meeting officially to order, and thank you all for being here. I will dispense with the calling of the roll. I detect a quorum. We have a very full agenda today and tomorrow, but today is a pretty heavy lift on a couple of important topics we want to get to. Without objection, I'll take up behind tab 1 the approval of the minutes from our last meeting, the meeting of August 23rd.
Second.
Thank you. I'll have properly moved and seconded. Any comments or changes? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? All right, the minutes are approved. Commission updates. I want to make mention of a couple of points and then yield to Lanice to see if there's anything in addition. First of all, Paula Davis, who you all know, one of our staff, has had a rough go of it lately. She can't be here at this time. She's had a illness in her immediate family and death in her family as well. Her father passed yesterday or the day before, and her husband is ill, so we certainly have her in our thoughts and prayers and wish her well. Also, as it relates to staff, we have, where is Touche? Is he here yet? I'm waiting for Representative Parkinson is a new, not staff, but is a new member of TACIR. Representative Parkinson will be coming along, but as to staff, we are welcoming David Lewis. David, are you out there? There you are. David is back, actually, as Senior Research Associate. He's coming back to us from the Office of the Criminal Justice Programs in the Department of Finance and Administration. And he brought us a wealth of experience before, and we're glad you brought it back. Welcome back, David. Happy to have you. And not in our minutes here, in your notes, is the fact that as we prepared for this, Carrie Courtney, and Carrie's not here. Where is she? Oh, you're trying to get out the door. See, this is a metaphor. Carrie is leaving. She may be leaving right now, but bittersweet. Carrie's going to go to work at General Services, and so she's going to be leaving us to go there, and this will officially be her last meeting. So you can't really get away yet, but we wish you well, and we'll miss you here. I hope to see you again. All right.
Be no party, will there, or anything?
Well, we'll talk about that, see if it's in the budget. Lanice has nothing to add. That's all I had under that category, and that'll get us then right on into tab 3 for today's presentations. As you can see, we have a number of presentations to be given on the subject of water and sewer rates for non-residents of cities. Representative Hill will be here, probably already is here, there he is, on this topic, and like so many of the things we get into, by golly, this is, when you first heard about it, it's like, what? But it's really a very important topic and has had some interesting twists and turns, as Brother Smith can tell us. I will yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Ben Smith, and while I have the opportunity, I want to recognize the other members that are working with me on this particular team: Catherine Corley, Nathan Shaver, and Michael Mount. I think they're all here. The House Local Government Committee sent House Bill 600 to the Commission for study, and of course we added that study to our work plan. I'll tell you a little bit about House Bill 600. As it was amended before being referred to TACIR, it would put a topside cap or limit on the water and sewer rates for a group of customers of the Johnson City Water and Sewer Department. And by using population ranges in the bill, the rate relief is targeted to those customers residing in Sullivan County, but outside the city limits of Johnson City. Now, in this situation, there are also outside customers in Washington County, Carter County, and Unicoi County. So there are other outside customers that are being served by the Johnson City Water and Sewer Department. Outside water and sewer customers of the Johnson City Water and Sewer Department pay, in all 4 counties now pay double the water and sewer rates that are charged to customers inside the city of Johnson City. House Bill 600 would have capped those outside rates at 150% of the inside rates. Now, since the issue of inside and outside water rates has come before the General Assembly several times, we've decided in our study to look at it on a statewide kind of basis, not focusing just entirely on Johnson City, but understanding that situation maybe as a patient on the table. But we want to look at it statewide, and that's what we're doing, and we want to get input from a lot of people. Most recently, the General Assembly mandated a study of outside water rates. That was in 2008, where they wanted all the rates that were over 200% of inside rates to be justified. So I'm not going to get into this too much. The speakers will cover this thoroughly. I want to introduce the speakers in mass today, all together, and then they'll come up in the order that they're on the agenda. And we've asked them to stay within 7 minutes apiece. We have the Honorable Representative of House District 3 here, Timothy Hill. I can tell you that we've had some very productive meetings with Representative Hill in his office about this issue. We also have M. Dennis Peterson, who's the city manager of Johnson City. Mr. Peterson testified before the local government committee in the House about this bill. The TACIR staff have followed up with Johnson City, had a great conference call with the folks there and Mr. Peterson, and they've answered numerous email inquiries that we've sent them. Also with us is Joyce Welburn, from the Office of the Comptroller. Joyce has a big job in state government in that she staffs the Water and Wastewater Financing Board and the Utility Management Review Board for the Comptroller. There's a lot of casework that comes before those boards. We also have Bob Frudenthal. Well, I hope we have Bob. I hadn't seen him. Yeah, there's Bob. We have Bob Frudenthal. He was appointed Executive Director of the Tennessee Association of Utility Districts in 2008, and he's become sort of our go-to guy for anything having to do with water supply, since he helped us out tremendously when we were working on those regional water studies that we brought to the Commission not so long ago. So we really still thank Bob for that. Finally, we have Alan Major, who's a finance and accounting consultant with Municipal Technical Advisory Service. Alan and Sharon Rollins and Ralph Cross have all given us advice on this. Alan's involvement in this matter goes back to the actual creation of these boards back in 1987. We had invited Tom Hubbard, who is a citizen of Piney Flats community, a concerned citizen, but he looked at the drive down here today and his business commitments and decided he couldn't make it. But we've got some testimony from him in written form that'll be available to you. That's the introductions. I guess I'd like to bring up Honorable Timothy Hill first.
Representative Hill, welcome. Glad to have you.
All right.
Appreciate you bringing all this to our attention. You're recognized.
Are you sure?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, what I'm going to speak to for my very, very quick 7 minutes is specific to my district and the citizens of my district, but I believe that there is definite statewide concern, statewide implication, as the gentleman said before me. You know, House Bill 600 it's a simple bill that reduces the rate differential of roughly 600 taps, give or take, that receive water and sewer services, and these residents live outside the footprint of Johnson City, Tennessee, but reside in Sullivan County. The current rate differential is set at 100%, and my legislation reduces it to 50%. I'm here on behalf of my constituents in Piney Flats. In looking at the situation, I feel that, especially in tough economic times, that this unjustified practice, and those are key words, is akin to utility rate discrimination, and because there seems to be no enforcement, this must be addressed by the legislature. The reason it must be addressed is because I've had several constituents who've attempted to have their rates justified and were literally laughed out of City Hall. They have no representation on the council. They have no one who will listen to them in the City Hall, so I'm compelled to continue to bring this legislation forward to shed light on questionable business practices. Hopefully, we'll find rate relief for my constituents who've been footing the bill for growth of a municipality in which they don't live. I've found that the rate differential on the water bills didn't seem to be the issue. It's the combination of the water and the sewer, a rate differential of 100%, that seems to have been the source of literally decades of frustration. So it has been a long time coming, to say the least. I have a constituent with a family of 4 who has documented less than average water consumption, but is paying an average of $153 per month for water and sewer, and he is not alone. He's not the only one. I can honestly say I'm disappointed with the lack of the willingness on the part of the municipality to work on the issue and to find a solution before we got here. Legislation should be the pretty much the final thing, almost a last resort in my mind. Unfortunately, I feel we have a situation in which they are not accountable, so their incentive to be cooperative, at least up to this point, is lacking. According to Tennessee Code Annotated 7-34-115, and I'm just going to share that very, very quickly, or at least a portion, not all of it. Notwithstanding the provisions of any other law to the contrary, as a matter of public policy, municipal utility systems shall be operated on sound business principles as self-sufficient entities. User charges, rates, and fees shall reflect the actual cost of providing the services rendered. No public works shall operate for gain or profit or as a source of revenue to a governmental entity, but shall operate for the use and benefit of the consumers served by such public works and for the improvement of the health and safety of the inhabitants of the area served. Ladies and gentlemen, according to state law, each municipality has to justify the actual delivery cost as part of their rate differential. Multiple attempts have been made that I'm aware to receive the justification from the municipality. Every time, including in committee, when this question is discussed, vague answers are given, nothing that is specific to what goes on in Piney Flats, which is part of my district. If the delivery cost warrants 100% rate differential, then so be it. But I highly doubt it. According to the city's P&L statement on pages 36 to 40, currently the municipality utilities reserve is well over $7 million. That's right, $7 million. The bonds owed on the utilities are lower than they've ever been in years. And of note, the bonds and interest issued are less every year because they're being paid down. But the rate differential for my constituents remains the same, which is to say the debt is being paid, but the municipality is charging the same to the people of Piney Flats, and clearly from what we can see that this is wrong. I'm glad to hear that there's a municipality in the state of Tennessee that's solvent, that has plenty of money, that's doing really well. What I'm not happy about is it is being done on the backs of Piney Flats residents. State law that justification, or state law states, it says that justification must be made. I believe the legislature was of the right mindset when the penalty for not doing so was set so great. This issue was serious to previous lawmakers. According to TCA 7-34-115F, the penalty for not charging the actual cost is great. municipalities have to pay back the ill-gotten gain and or face removal from office. It actually says the word ouster in the law, which is a scary term, especially for us elected officials, right? What we're dealing with is a major growth area in Northeast Tennessee, and I'm proud of that. I'm very proud of that. My thought is that this situation is not unique to the Third House District. I believe it's something that we see statewide, after especially talking with the staff from TACIR. Unfortunately, there's no easy solution, and my request is that during our discussion, we keep the people of Piney Flats in mind. They are paying for a system that could have been paid for years ago, but have no idea how much their actual cost is. And lest we forget, that's required by state law. Because of either not having separate books or an unwillingness to share information, my constituents have no idea what their cost of delivery is or if their rates are appropriate. I've laid out my reasons for bringing the bill. My constituents deserve rate relief and clear understanding as to the cost of their services. Members of TACIR, on behalf of the good people of Piney Flats, I ask for a positive recommendation as we ask the municipality just to simply follow existing law, which they clearly are not doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hill. Questions for Representative Hill? Mayor Bragg.
Thank you for your presentation. Living in a city that has a rural utility district which charges our city residents twice, would you be willing to add that to your bill to get rate relief for those consolidated utility district who are paying because they're in a rural residential utility district?
You know, my mindset, you know, I at first blush, and we may need to think about it a little bit, I wouldn't have a problem with it at first blush. My intent is to get back to the law. You know, the law clearly says what's the actual cost, and that's what's supposed to be passed on.
Yes, Senator Henry.
Thanks, sir. Representative Hill, do the folks in Piney Flats have a legal remedy to get a court order on this water supply to go down there and check books? Can he do that?
Well, the question, you know, I'm sure they would be able to bring litigation. And before I answer that, Senator, it's an honor to be able to be in the same committee and even have a question asked of the Senate. So
oh, my goodness. Oh, Mr.
There you go. But their legal remedy, I'm sure they could seek litigation if they so choose. Part of the reason that I felt like I had to bring legislation on such what felt like a microscopic topic, but we know that it's not now. But part of the reason that I felt like I had to bring legislation is because citizens of Piney Flats who are not, they don't have any representation in the city, when they try to approach the city to have questions, they get either no answer or literally, I had one constituent that was laughed at when they were trying to seek this information. So it's kind of what's brought us to the point.
Mr. Vice Chairman, and then Representative Odom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hill, great presentation. Thank you very much. Maybe two questions. Do you have any other source of water and sewer other than Johnson City? And is Johnson City obligated to provide that service to Piney Flats?
I'm aware of the Bluntville Utility District, which in some areas is across the street. As far as their obligation, I'm not aware. There's been some question that's been raised to me whether or not that they have a contract with the people since the Piney Flats is unincorporated. There's a question there maybe, but that obligation I'm unaware.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Representative Odom.
I know you were making reference to the statute that provides for an explanation, a justification to for any adjustment in fees. How long have these lines been in the water? I mean, in the water. How long have the lines been in the ground? I mean, is this a relatively new service or?
It's not relatively new. My guess is I think I turned 32 here in a couple of weeks. and most of the lines have been in the ground as long or longer, but it's definitely been years and years, if not past decades. It's established services.
Well, was there any kind of bonding done on the construction project? I mean, it seems like if there's some expense that is associated with providing water, and I've had this on the other way around. I've had utility districts within Davidson County that were charging significantly much more for new customers,
right,
because they were running lines, and that was part of that justification that the statute references.
Right.
But you're not aware of any of that.
But part of the problem is, again, without direct actual knowledge of what the actual cost is. If a bond had been taken a decade ago, certainly there was direct costs associated with it then. There's no doubt about that. Where is it now? Where has it been for the last 5 years? It is as if there was a certain amount set, the 100% rate differential, because they are outside the footprint, and it just stayed there. Which there's no way that the cost of delivery of service today is the same as when it was originally taken over, or if bonds were floated, whatever it was. And that's part of the concern.
So in your discussions with the city, you're not being provided any information?
Not at this point.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Hill, so I guess, is it your position that although they have a statutory right and they may have a remedy under statute, it's not working for a variety of reasons, and
Correct.
Your bill recommends the cap as an alternative?
Correct.
And I'm sure you've considered whether, they may come out ahead if they were in a position to pursue the remedy the statute gives them now. They may come out better than if it was the cap alternative.
I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, I'm with you. I think this is a critical issue, but caps sometimes suggest a price that, everybody just sort of would then raise their rates to the cap. I see that happen in other industries. And what are your response to that?
Initially, when we first started, and I think we're in I believe it's the second generation of the legislation. Initially, when we started out with just water that was provided. And then we found out that wasn't really the issue. It was the water and sewer together that's causing, like I said, the majority of the frustration. If through the process of TACIR, we find that, no, it doesn't need to be 50%, but this is the course we need to take, and it's reasonable, and it provides rate relief for those folks in Piney Flats, I'm open to it. I'm certainly open to it.
I hear you. Okay. Representative Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me, and thank you, Representative Hill, for bringing this to our attention. I serve on the East Side Utility District, which is one of the largest residential or one of the largest rural utility districts in Tennessee, and we are every month battling water loss, and we have to report that to the comptroller. And we have discovered politicians filling up volunteer fire department trucks and filling up swimming pools. It seems like the year of the election, it seems to get more than others. We're running around 11% water loss, and we're still battling that because we realize that forces us to impose fees that cover just wasted water. If I'm not mistaken, isn't Johnson City running about 35% giveaway water?
That's correct. I believe in the...
Do you have any justification for that you're aware of? We're scared to death at 11%. I'm going to go home and say, guys, let the taps run. Doesn't matter.
Sure. That was it was kind of one of those numbers that stuck out to me. I get to serve on business and utilities, but I'm certainly not a water authority in that regard. I actually spoke with a couple other folks. They seem to think that was a little bit on the high side. Again, yeah, a little bit. Again, though, it goes back to the original thing, which is my constituents don't know what their actual cost is. Which again in code it says you've got to charge the actual cost.
Yeah, that's where I'm confused. I'm not really sure how this is existing under the laws of the utility districts as I understand them. And I agree completely with Mayor Bragg. His people, and that's just my personal opinion, but if we're going to do it, would it solve the problem to simply say there can be no rate tax differential based on your being in a city or out of a city? Is that the
Mayor Bragg, I don't see why your people should pay double. I don't see why Piney Flats should pay double. The whole purpose is to distribute it as equally and equitably across the system as possible. Would that be a solution to both you and Mayor Bragg?
Equality is a good thing, I've heard. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sargent, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The one question I have on when we're talking sewer taps, would these houses that exist out in Piney Flat or wherever they exist, would there be a house there if the land wouldn't perk? Could they even get a septic?
I mean, the growth, and this is one of the interesting things about Piney Flats, and part of the reason for my interest is it is literally the growth area of Sullivan County. The portions of Bristol and portions of Johnson City, the county, everybody likes to, try to have a piece, I think, at Piney Flats because it's so much growth. How it all shakes out, I can't answer that because I don't know. I mean, I don't know if this part takes a piece or not.
Well, there could be one difference in the water district if they're providing sewer, and all of a sudden you're outside the city, you have 100 acres of land where you'd have one house per acre, but all of a sudden with sewer you could have 5 houses an acre. That makes a big difference on a utility district. Have we looked at that, or have you taken any of that in consideration?
That you're the first to raise that part.
I mean, because that's a major thing. When water is easy, but wastewater is not an easy subject.
Right.
So, yeah, I think we have to, Mr. Chairman, look at that on the wastewater, because someone could go right outside the city and put 4 or 5 houses an acre and could change that whole sewer system plant and make it obsolete in a hurry. If you did that, now I'm sure they're not having that type of growth, but in reverse, in Murfreesboro, in Rutherford County, they are having that type of growth. So something I'm concerned about on that.
I think this sets the stage nicely. As you remember, as we look down and you see that we're going to have City Manager Johnson City, and we're going to have Bob Freudenthal with Association Utility Districts and so forth, that you're planting the questions that a lot of these folks will be able to answer. I see Representative Odom seeking recognition, and then Representative Carter, and then we'll go to the next speaker.
Just one brief follow-up. I haven't been to Piney Flats in a long time, and so I haven't seen the growth you're talking about. But I mean, isn't there the possibility, if there's residential developments being built there, that the developer is funding the expansion of the system? And if that's the case, then I've got even more questions for the water system, right? Because they're either approving that on the front end, and if the infrastructure is being paid for by private development, then I would like to see what the response is on how the increased fees are justified.
Representative Carter.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Odom stole my thunder there, and I appreciate that. I don't know how they do it in all other counties, but in Hamilton County, when the line's extended, it's the developer and not the municipality nor the county. We have a county wastewater system there which it's done by the developer and not by the governmental agency. And then secondly, remember this, if we run a water line, it is your option as a landowner to hook onto that water line or not. If we run a sewer line, you have no choice. You either hook on, and if you don't want to hook on, you don't have to, but you have to pay the full freight. You have to pay for it as though you're using it. And in Hamilton County, we have many retired couples who can't afford the $4,500 or $5,000 for the plumbing to literally hook on, that simply pays the wastewater, the fees each month, but have no use to it. And secondly, the report that I constantly heard when I was with Hamilton County is a developer goes out and builds this beautiful subdivision. He needs sewer because he wants to put 5 houses where the county only let him put 1 because of the percolation. I don't have any problem with that. Let the developer build the line. But for those people that have farms that it runs and it touches their line and they have to pay that fee then, that's a problem. And I would hope that in our look at search for equity would include that. So thank you.
All right. Representative Hill, we're ready to move on to hear some of these other speakers, but you want to close?
Nope. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Representative Hill. I like your style. From Johnson City, City Manager. Dennis Peterson, there you are. Welcome. Interesting questions. It's just a perfect setup, right?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. If someone could give me a hand on how to get, okay.
And make sure, I know you can't tell from that side of the podium, but acoustics are sometimes a problem in here, so speak as closely to the mic as you can.
Yes, sir. Thank you for this opportunity. As a number of points have been made, and a couple of them I just want to go over. The first being, this legislation as proposed, it identifies only Johnson City and only customers that live in Sullivan County that are beyond the city limits. As has been pointed out, we've got customers in 4 counties, and the outside the city customers in Sullivan County only comprise 22% of our outside customers. So whatever the recommendation may end up being, we would urge you as strongly as we could, if we're going to make a change, let's make this statewide and make it equitable for everybody. We're not the only system that charges twice for an outside customer. There are, I believe, 8 other systems that charge more than we do. Of all of the water rates in Sullivan County, we're about in the middle as far as price per 5,000 gallons of usage on a monthly basis. So while we may be at 2 times the inside rate, we're still about a median price in terms of what that monthly bill is going to be for water. This is largely due to the fact of we have such a much greater economy of scale due to the size of the overall system. One thing to keep in mind, that water source, or those water sources that we draw water from, and the treatment plants, this whole utility system was started by the citizens of Johnson City and the taxpayers of Johnson City, and from that grew the Johnson City utility system. So there is cost beyond the line in front of the house. There's the water source, the water treatment, the plant, the pumps. East Tennessee, for those of you who haven't been there in a while or haven't been there, the topography there is drastically different than Middle and West Tennessee. We pump water and wastewater a lot before it gets to its final destination. Whereas with a utility system, typically the water source and the area of that utility district isn't real great, and there's not as nearly the amount of pumping that goes on. Or in Middle and West Tennessee, the topography is much flatter. Gravity takes care of a lot of what we have to pump. So having said that, I want to give you a real quick overview of our system. We are in 4 counties. Okay, thank you, ma'am. We are in 4 counties. We've got 2 water treatment plants. We got 925 miles of water line. You can see the total accounts. We have wastewater plants that have received awards and recognition from EPA, the AWWA, several different agents, nationally recognized agencies, as well as the Boone Lake Property Owners Association. Several decades ago, the condition of Boone Lake was very, very poor. Part of what has turned that around is our extension of sewer lines out into the unincorporated areas to get people onto sanitary sewer and to get off the septic tank so that that septic doesn't run straight into the Boone Lake. Our city commission is absolutely dedicated to environmental stewardship, as I have pointed out. Economic development. We recognize that everybody that works and lives in East Tennessee lives somewhere, and everybody's just as important no matter where they live. It's very important for the economic viability of East Tennessee that people have adequate water, sewer, electricity, a place to work, and a good place to go to school. So one way that we contribute is to make sure that where we can, we get water and sewer to people. Just in the last couple of years, we made an extension down into Washington County that we probably won't get a payback for 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, there just aren't any customers down there. But we had a number of people down there that their wells failed or the drought had made them go dry. They were having to get water literally out of a water buffalo that the emergency management folks put into place. It's the right thing to do. It's not like that we're trying to build this big water sewer empire and transfer money from that to the general fund. There is no transfer to the general fund. The $7 million reserve is a pretty small reserve when you look at the total asset value of this system and what it costs to make replacements. Just in the last 8 years, we have made almost $52 million worth of improvements to our water and wastewater system. 49 of that on the wastewater side. You can see the 2.5 on the water side. New EPA regulations are really what's driving a big part of that. I mean, it's absolutely critical that we provide very good facilities so that we keep our waters and waterways clean. We did a regional sewer plant expansion, which serves our outside or regional system, a $24 million project to ensure that we could provide wastewater service. We've also done $12 million worth of lift stations out into what we refer to as the regional system. So those two projects alone were $36 million of improvements to the wastewater side that we've made in the last 8 years. We talked about economic development. The Tri-Cities Regional Airport is located in Sullivan County. We're co-owners with Bristol, Kingsport, Sullivan County, Washington County. We were asked to provide water out there many years ago. We ran water to the airport. We have water to Northeast State College there next to the airport. You see a picture here of a FedEx Freight and an air cargo center. Those are still in the general vicinity of the airport. Sullivan County came to us and asked us if we could extend water and wastewater services to those facilities so that economic development activity could take place. What you see before you here is an example of the types of lines that we're replacing throughout our system. Over time, the types of materials used in conveying water and wastewater have changed. Galvanized pipes were real popular, 50s, 60s. You see what the inside of galvanized pipe looks like. If you've ever been somewhere and you turned the water on and you got rusty water, that's probably what the inside of that water pipe looked like that water was coming out of. We have committed to replacing a minimum 1% of the galvanized line in our system on an annual basis. The regional system has 45 miles remaining at an estimated replacement cost of right at $11.9 million. This map reflects the utility districts throughout our system that we have acquired over time. In each one of these acquisitions, we were requested to come and take over the utility district because of a lack of a good source of water, the utility district's inability to make upcoming payments, or the utility district's inability to adequately maintain their system in order to keep their permits from the state of Tennessee. The most recent one is the Chinquapin, which is in the upper right-hand corner there. This UD was taken over by us in 2005 at the request of the Utility District Board. At the time of this takeover, our outside the city rate was exactly what it is today, 2 times the inside city rate. The Sullivan County Board of Commissioners approved this acquisition by the Johnson City Utility District, or utilities. So Sullivan County knew what the rates were. The Sullivan County Commission approved the acquisition, and we were able to go in there and take a utility district that was in a financially precarious situation. We've replaced a lot of lines in there. We've made system improvements. We've put in fire hydrants. We have in place in Sullivan County 160-some fire hydrants in unincorporated areas because we've got a water system there. And when we put that water system in, we size the lines appropriately to accommodate future growth and to provide those citizens fire protection when and if it is needed. What this is on the screen now is an example of, we respond to requests for service. This is an example of a lady that had a water quality problem. We responded to her the next day, and in the last paragraph there in September is an email correspondence from her thanking us for improving her water quality and being so prompt in responding to her needs. Here's an example of some line replacements that have been done in the last 18 months in Sullivan County in Piney Flats. We replaced 13,000 feet of water line and put in 8 hydrants, and that construction cost was $650,000. This is just an example of our ongoing maintenance into the system. You can't just buy a system and figure what does it cost and what does it take to service the initial debt. There's continuing improvements to the system that you have to make. At this time, I'd like to relinquish the floor, if I may, to Bart Krebs, who works with Raftellus, and he can explain to you the methodology about how we set our rates.
This is what we call the razzle-dazzle, where at the conclusion of his presentation, he laterals to, tell us your name again?
Bart Krebs with Raftellus Financial. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Give us the overview of the overview.
Real quick, Raftellus Financial Consultants, we're a national water, wastewater, financial and rate consulting firm. We do this type of work all across the country. We've authored textbooks on the subject matter. We're registered with the SEC and the MSRB. In terms of our history with Johnson City, been working with them since about 2003, so we have a real comprehensive understanding of their financial structure and their pricing objectives in terms of water and sewer services. Helped them fund a significant capital program, which was just touched upon. Worked at optimizing the financing structure of that program and building up those reserves to, again, improve and enhance credit quality. And we've made some recommendations in terms of adjustments to the rate structure.
All right, we have that in our materials.
In terms of trends and what we're seeing in the industry as far as why rates are increasing, certainly the big three: aging infrastructure, capacity needs, and regulatory environment, particularly on the wastewater side. Federal funding is less. A lot of the costs are being pushed down to a local level, so we're seeing rates increase much higher in terms of compared to general inflation. In terms of customers serving outside of the corporate boundaries, we see this quite often. We do this work across the country. Very often there is a differential charge. The range we typically see is between 1.5 and 2 times on a differential. Common reasons for justification: customers are non-owners of the system. They didn't make the original investment in the system. Thus, the owners seek a compensation for rights and risk of ownership. There can be additional costs of providing service in terms of direct investment in infrastructure. There can be less people in terms of population density, and also in some cases different usage characteristics. In terms of, one of the things we've, do I need to?
Bart, I gotta bring out the hook. The egg timer has rung.
I understand. Thank you for your time.
I see that your data points are in the materials here, the supplemental materials we had, and we know who you are. We know where to find you, and we'll call upon you. And thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Seriously. That leads us to Joyce Welborn from Legislative Auditor from the Comptroller's Office. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. I apologize. Kay. Yes, you're recognized. Apologize.
I'd like to ask Mr. Peterson a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Please.
Would you agree that water rates and sewer rates are significant components of annexation?
They can be. Sullivan County in particular is not an area that we're real actively annexing. Probably at least half, if not more, of our water sewer customers in Sullivan County are beyond our urban growth boundary. So we couldn't annex them if we wanted to.
So that question doesn't apply to you in this instance, then?
Not as a general rule, no, ma'am.
Do you think it could apply if a bill were passed that limited the water rate structure, and then the General Assembly enacted legislation that removed the right to annex by ordinance? Would that have an impact on your ability to serve outside the city limits?
If part of the materials that Bart had sent you all told what the financial impact would be to the system if we were limited to 1.5 times the inside rate. If a limit was put into place and there was a constriction on the ability of cities to grow through annexation, it would force cities to think long and hard about, can you really afford to extend these utility services beyond the corporate limits? Due to the utility doesn't have a credit rating. The city's got a AA credit rating. We can borrow money with a shotgun bond, the full faith and credit of the city in addition to the revenues generated by the utility, and get a whole lot better rate than if the utility was forced to go out and get a note on its own. So there's some fairly significant savings there. While we haven't run the numbers, and I don't think anybody has, to determine, would the rates have to be more than 2 times for the outside customer if you went through the process of justifying what each household had to pay for their utility payments. Based on the economy of scale, the ability to save on interest expense and a variety of other reasons, it could very well end up that if the outside customer had to stand on its own, that they may end up paying far in excess of 2 times the inside city rate. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Then you're saying you cannot or have not have a financial statement showing the cost in the different areas?
We do not have that information, no, sir. It would be extraordinarily difficult to do that because we've got, as I pointed out, 900 and some miles of water.
So you just grab something and put a cost to it?
Well, what we do is we determine what it costs us to keep our system in compliance with the regulations and to replace those parts of our system that are failing or beyond their useful life. Yet in the millions of dollars of electricity costs that we've got and chemicals, all of our operating, and we set a rate from that with the help of Raftelis, who
and the second question is, you have a rate for outside, and if that area gets annexed, does the rate change?
That rate would then be,
although you still got those costs out there that you work charging them, but they get annexed, automatically it goes down.
If they are annexed, that is correct.
Mayor Rowland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Peterson, follow through on a question for Representative Hill. When Piney Flats, I assume, asked you to provide water service to them, they knew the price when they asked for that?
At the time we took over Chinkopin, some of those other utility districts go back into the 70s. The Chinkopin district, the outside rate was twice the inside rate. The UD board approved it, and the Sullivan County Commission approved that as well, knowing that's what the rates were. Yes.
But if you have a rate increase that applies to everyone that's receiving service, everybody gets an increase at the same time. You just don't send an increase out to the to Piney Flats? No, sir. If and when we do a rate increase, it's applied equitably across the board to every customer we have. All right, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say something about Mr. Carter's, Representative Carter's East Side Utility. We buy water from you, Mike. It's very good water, a little high, though.
Your name was called, Representative Carter, and then Mayor Waters. But
I've recommended we start selling you used water. We can do that as a discount. And I'm working on that now. Thank you. I very much appreciate your being here today, and y'all are doing a good job. I'm too much knowledgeable about water companies and the cost of maintenance and repair, so I understand that.
Yes.
I guess I'll ask you this, though, which I've asked the city of Chattanooga. When you go and build these regional facilities, do you not guarantee to the federal government that the services will be made available to everyone within a geographical region? And do you not certify in that grant that everyone will be charged the exact same amount?
I wish I could say yes, because that would mean we'd been getting federal grants. We haven't gotten a federal grant for a plant in years and years and years.
Okay.
All this has been financed locally.
Okay.
We're
so you don't
issuing debt.
you use solely bond financing. You've never gotten a grant from anyone else.
We got a grant, was it an RDA grant, I guess, for the Gregtown extension down that I mentioned earlier to those people that did not have any water.
Was that a federal or state grant?
That was federal. It was both. It was.
Yeah, you might want to read the fine print in that.
Right now, we recognize everybody down through there that wants water can certainly use it. And our position is, if we've got a service in place, if somebody needs the service and they're willing to pay for it, we're glad to have them as a customer.
Well, yeah, I understand that. All I was saying is I hope you'll consider that when those grants are granted to you, they come from all your residents. They don't just come from your city residents. It's all the money in the past the feds that go there, and that's a raging debate in Chattanooga. But we did do some research, and we found some incredibly interesting grant terms when you read them about not being able to differentiate against rate holders in that area. So you might want to take a look at that.
Yes.
But I really appreciate what you're doing. I grew up out in Ooltewah where the ground doesn't perk. Finally got a sewer line put in down to my house, and they put it 36 feet away from my house, and I can't get to it. So I'd give anything to be paying the sewer rates that you're talking about, but I just continue to build field lines, and I assure you it has cost me more to operate a septic tank than it would have cost me to run a sewer system. So I may have to move to Cleveland.
All right now.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate what you're doing for these areas. I grew up in one, I understand that. So
Mayor Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. On your tap fees, that's obviously separate from your rates. Are they double outside the city limits, the tap fees that you charge?
If I may, I need to defer to my water. Yes, sir.
Okay. That, as I understand it, tap fees are to pay for infrastructure is one of the reasons we have tap fees, to help pay for infrastructure to put in, well, the lines are usually put in by developers, but for the water plants and so forth. Is that's what tap fees are? That's part of why we charge those. Okay, yes. Thank you.
And just as a follow-up, I think Representative Odom asked the question, and Mr. Waters hit on it too. As far as the system improvements, we typically make those line extensions at the cost of the system and don't force the developer to do it. In our particular circumstance, if a developer is doing a development within the city and they want to put in water and sewer, we will reimburse them the cost of the materials, and all the cost they incur is the cost of the labor to install the materials. If it's not inside the city, then we would ask them to put in the materials. But Tom, have we done? I don't remember a development that a developer has done outside the city. And, the majority of the stuff we're talking about in Sullivan County are the UDs that we basically got out of a financially precarious situation. We assumed all their liabilities and all their bad lines, and we're replacing all that at the system's expense.
All right, sir. All right, anything further? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Get to the comptroller's office, Ms. Wilburn. There we are.
I didn't go far.
Thank you. You're recognized.
My name is Joyce Welburn. I am the Utilities Board Manager for the Water and Wastewater Financing Board and the Utility Management Review Board within the Office of the Comptroller. The Water and Wastewater Financing Board was created under TCA 68-221-1007 and established in part to determine and ensure the financial integrity of certain water systems and wastewater facilities. All annual audits are filed with and reviewed by the Division of Local Government Audit in the Comptroller's Office. Referrals are made to my boards, to the Water and Wastewater Board and the UMRB, are made for any system that has 2 consecutive years with a negative change in net assets, a default on debt, or having a total negative net assets. The board members are appointed by, 7 of the board members are appointed by the governor, 2 are, 1 is appointed by the comptroller, and 1 is appointed by the Commissioner of Environment Conservation. The a utility fund is designed to be self-sufficient, operating on the revenues generated by the system itself, rates, fees, charges, etc. There should be no reliance on general fund of the municipality for revenue. The review process of the board is a review versus expenses review, not a rate review. That means that a review is to ensure that the revenues are sufficient to cover the expenses that are needed, including all operation, maintenance, debt service, and depreciation. How a municipality sets those rates to achieve that goal is left to the municipality. Unless the outside rates are extremely high compared to the inside rates, they are not even typically questioned during the review process. However, municipal officials are told by board staff that any rate differential should be justifiable. Don't set a higher rate because you can, because they can't vote, or because they don't pay taxes. It is often said that outside customers pay a higher rate in order that a utility can recover the capital cost incurred for providing water and wastewater service to them. However, this justification for higher rates usually fails when the audit shows no separate depreciation allocated to the capital cost. In my opinion, after doing this for 20 plus years, all rates should be justifiable, whether they are inside rates or outside rates. The magic boundary of the municipality should not make the difference.
Questions for Ms. Welborn, Senator Henry, and then Mayor Beats, May.
When you all tell a district they need to raise or lower your rate, and they disagree with you, do they take you to court or what happens?
Both boards have the authority through Chancery Court to force a rate increase. Typically, the boards will say, you increase your revenue. They don't tell them to increase their rates. They say increase your revenue by whatever percentage we guess. But the boards do have the authority through Chancery Court to force a rate increase if the utility decides not to.
Increase or decrease?
Correct.
Thank you.
Mayor Beats.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Welborn, for coming today. In one of the items in your report, it said that you had reviewed 27 cases. I'm assuming a case is a utility district.
You're talking about the 08 report?
I don't believe it says here that I've got. It said you did 27 and only 1 received a recommendation from audit.
Yes, sir.
Is that 08?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then that's the one I'm referring to. How many of them did you review for water and sewer, or were they all for water and sewer?
We were instructed to review water, inside, outside, water rates, wastewater rates, and tap fees. So there's 4 areas that we looked at within the report.
So all 27 of them provided both?
To be honest with you, I haven't looked at that report in many years, but it could be that the 27, it could have been that they hit one area or the other, or they hit all 4.
Okay. Do you, and I'm asking you from memory here, do you remember why that the one system out of the ones you reviewed was recommended for adjustment?
I believe that was Savannah. Their rates were high outside, and they justified them. I don't remember what their justification was at this time, but they did justify that the rates were necessary.
And there were 8 more to be reviewed. And do you know if they've been reviewed since 08?
Probably not. I don't think Savannah has been under the jurisdiction of the Water and Wastewater Board since that time. So if they haven't, I haven't looked at them again.
Okay. And one more question, Mr. Chairman. You said that when you did a review, if someone's rates were extremely out of kilter, I guess it to someone in Roane County, Tennessee, extremely might be a different word meaning than what it does to my friend Mr. Kyle over in Memphis. What was extremely to you?
Sometimes it is the fact that it's 150. Sometimes the fact it's 200. It just, every case is different. So
Just
it's
a
really hard to answer
justification?
that.
If I could justify 225%, you didn't consider
I don't
that to be
care.
extreme?
No, sir.
But if I couldn't justify 50%, you thought that was extreme?
Yes, sir.
Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am, and appreciate you coming today. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mayor Rowland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was noticing some of the prices, and I would comment that the Cleveland price per 5,000 gallons outside the city is $26.19. And I look not in your district, Representative Carter, but in many in Hamilton County, 5,000 gallons as much as $47. It goes to what Mayor Bragg said, that sometimes the rural residents are paying extremely high fees as opposed to what cities may charge.
Yes, sir. That may be true. And every case is different. I mean, it's like Johnson City said, you've got mountains in East Tennessee. In West Tennessee, you have relatively easy digging, very flat. So it's different. Every system is different. Your debt load is different. Your type of treatment is different. The type of pipe in the ground, the number of customers, the density of the customers. We try really, really hard not to compare System A to System B because everything is different. So we try to take it on its own and just look at that.
Good. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other question? Yes. Representative Carter.
Thank you for coming. Each month I send to the comptroller a water loss report on behalf of Eastside Utility District. If we ever came up with one that was 34%, I had visions of you coming with whips and a knife in your teeth and a gun in each hand. Is it okay if, have we been struggling to limit this and work with this, or have I overreacted to the rules I read about your office and water loss?
I try to leave my black cat at home.
Well, I appreciate that. Remember this face.
Don Stafford and I are pretty good friends. So.
Good guy. But isn't 34% extreme?
The old water loss criteria was 35%, and it was actual water loss. The new criteria beginning January of this year is the validity score, which is basically, it's a new formula. It's a very elaborate formula. The validity score is basically the confidence in the data that you're using to calculate. And the other criteria is non-revenue water as a percent of operating cost. So we're looking more at financial triggers than we are at actual water loss. So to answer your question, 35% is high. It's a third of your water, but that's not our criteria anymore.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes, Senator Henry.
Look at Shelby County, please, ma'am, in your chart here. This your rates here.
I don't have that with me.
Well,
Shelby County has really, really cheap water.
well, I know what I'm driving at. It shows Shelby County, when they sell to the city of Memphis, that's $13.60. When they sell to Germantown, it's only $6.75. Isn't that, whoever's overseeing the rates, that must have been a real tough one, because the people all over downtown Memphis are paying $14, and the people in Germantown are paying $7 for $5,000.
These rates are set by the community.
By who?
By the community themselves. So Germantown has set their rate, Memphis has set their rate, Bartlett has set their rate.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good point, Senator Henry. I mean, I think if I read it correctly, if you look at the Memphis line, inside the city charges $13.60. Memphis charges folks outside the city $20.15. Towns like Germantown, I guess Germantown has its own water system. Bartlett does. Collierville does, by the way, but they're not on here, and not all of them were necessarily picked up. But Senator Kyle.
Don't they all get their water from TVA, regardless of what city?
I'm sorry, from who?
Not in Shelby.
TVA.
No.
Are they getting theirs? They're getting theirs from Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, are they not?
I don't think all of them in Shelby County.
Oh, not in Shelby. For example, Collierville has its own
Right.
water system.
Well, I guess I had the same question Senator Henry did. I assumed when I saw these rates that these included the water rate, which, if you know, people will slip something into your water rate for other things than just water.
Like Roundup for something.
They're
that's
not
right.
supposed to be doing that.
Hundreds for them.
But I was just curious about that. Thank you. We'll sit after the meeting.
Other questions? Mayor Waters. That's a great.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You are a living metaphor for what we're talking about today, Mayor Waters.
I was waiting for somebody to say that.
Just one quick question. In here, it talks about the report and the case is reviewed. How current is that report? When was it? When was that review completed?
Which review is he talking? The 28. That 2000. I think the General Assembly did it in either 07 or 08, and it was done within a year. Between, if it passed in 07, it was done before 08, or if it passed in 08, it was done before 09.
All right. Anything further for Joyce at this time? Not at this time. Thank you.
I'll be back.
Okay. Yes, you will. I do want to give Representative Hill an opportunity to rebut, for lack of a better term, but we have two other presenters. Brother Freudenthal, I hear your name pronounced many different ways. I actually went to school with a Freudenthal.
That would be the European way of doing it.
That's correct, and he was. He actually was.
Dixon County, we say Freudenthal.
Freudenthal. Bob, welcome. Executive Director of the Tennessee Association of Utility Districts. No one knows more about this than you.
I'm afraid so.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Thank you for letting me be here today. We do represent utility districts. We also represent municipalities. We have more municipalities as members as we do utility districts, so we hear both sides of this equation. On a personal note, I've worked 25 years for a municipality. I've worked 6 years for a utility district, and now I'm in association management for 5, so I've heard both sides of the equation again. The fundamental thing that we bring to you today is rates are to be justifiable and reasonable. If they do that, they're okay. To put a cap or a limit of what that should be in our minds is probably not the best way to do it, because each case, as you heard from Ms. Welborn and others, is different and specific. It may be that 150% is too high or non-justifiable, but it may be that 250% is justifiable, depending on overall cost and expansion in that. When Ms. Patrick and I were serving on the water resource allocation and we did the pilot studies, we saw various numbers across the board and what those costs were. You have to factor all that in, and impact on systems, impact on debt, depreciation, which is a huge item every time you do something. For example, I was talking to a utility today that's doing a major plant rebuild, new expansion, and as a result, depreciation is going up $650,000. That's going to be a rate increase. Doesn't cost, I mean, it's for nothing, but it's there and it's mandated, and it'll be appropriate. So reasonableness, justification, an avenue of recourse is something that we would support. UMRB, you have the right of your ratepayer to challenge or question. Whether they be inside the city or out, they're still your ratepayer. They should have the ability to ask that question. I yield the rest of my time to you, sir.
Bob, do you think the mechanisms in place are adequate, though, for rate-paying citizens who live outside of a municipality and have these questions? I mean, they don't have necessarily have the tools at their disposal to know how to crack this code, so to speak, for lack of a better way to put it. I mean, I know it's one thing. The statute reads pretty clearly, and they have certain rights, but in terms of their ability to enforce those rights, as a practical matter, don't you think there's something more we could do?
I think as a practical matter, the best thing you can do is improve communication of what avenues you have. In the utility district, they have to put in their audit, they have to put it once a year about if you have an issue, this is how you go about the process. Perhaps on the municipal side, the Water and Wastewater Finance Board could be further empowered to do the same thing and hear those concerns.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Questions for Mr. Frodenthal? Representative Odom?
Well, you took off in the direction I wanted to, Mr. Chairman, because I mean, that's what I was going to ask you. Who's the rate policeman here? Because it, when you're looking at a group of citizens in a particular part of the state, I mean, where do they really go? I mean, surely if they're looking at a monthly bill of the example that the representative gave, and it seems like that in looking at the numbers that there are a number of systems that just double it, just double the in-city rate for out, and that's either one heck of a coincidence or it's just a trend. And it would seem to me we've got to come up with some mechanism where either through the audit, because we heard from the comptrollers, they're looking at fiscal integrity of the system, but they're not looking if some ratepayers may be gouged a little bit. And I've seen examples in the past, as I say, with some utility districts that operated in this county, that some of their rates were really questionable, especially when we knew that private developers were responsible for most of the construction costs of system extensions. Point was well made about tap fees. I don't know that we heard what the tap fee that was originally paid for by these customers, what was involved there. So I just did not. It would seem to me there would be a way to determine if there's additional cost associated with pumping water or sewage to a particular community, and that was an ongoing expense that was greater than the original system. That could be justified, and that could be pointed out. But I don't see anywhere in the process now where that must be done. So I would be open to, surely we're not reinventing the wheel here. So surely some states have tackled this, especially states that have more difficult challenges with water than we may have most of the time. So I'd be interested in the association's thoughts on that.
I think our position is, take for example in the utility district, bringing that matter before the Utility Management Review Board, as Ms. Welborn talked about, in the board itself make the decision, is it reasonable or whatever. The follow-up to that, of course, is through Chancery Court. And I think the same should be true for the Water Wastewater Finance Board and its provision. I agree with you, there should be some right of question and dialogue. There also should be some methodology of proving reasonableness and justification. In your audit every year, utility district has to put their rate and the method by which they calculated it. I'm not sure, Joyce, on the audit requirement of a municipality, whether they do or they don't. They do not. So in some respects we have it, but we need to do it across the board.
Yes, sir.
It's exactly like annexation. I mean, these out of city or out of system customers, they have no elected officials that are representing them on this matter. It seems like to me they're in no man's land, and they basically are in a process where they're probably going to just have to pay what they're told to pay, and I'm not a particular fan of that. I think it ought to be justified.
Ms. Shepard?
Yes, you said everything should be justified, I think also, and I think, Joyce, you said probably the least criteria that should dictate rates is a city limit line.
I would agree with that.
there is no reason why the water rates should be any more outside in many areas than they are inside. I think we have a long ways to go with the utility districts that justify the rates.
I would agree with that, with the exception of, as was stated, when you take in a new area or you have to expand service for that area and its impact back on the main system, there should be some differential there, or at least a determination so you know whether it is or it isn't.
That's right, and many times it's a benefit to go ahead and because it's so densely populated right outside, almost in a donut in many cases. So just to have a city limit line dictate rates, I don't think can be justified. That one thing.
Senator Kyle to disagree, and then Mayor Bragg.
Well, I don't know if I know enough to disagree or not, but that had never stopped me before. You get a 4-year contract, you can just whatever. That's why they give Odom just a 2-year contract, because they have to keep people on a tighter leash. If I've learned anything in these meetings and discussions we've had about annexation, is that water and sewer are generally municipal functions almost universally, and the counties are not involved in that. There are costs of any operation, it seems to me, which don't necessarily show up on a line item on your budget or your board, and it just seems to me if the justification for rates being higher outside the city is that you're not paying city taxes. I mean, the city has put together an infrastructure to build a operation to allow for an expansion of water. It just seems to me there's got to be they're not equal and they're not exactly the same. Now, I don't know whether water is the right item. I would say you're absolutely right. The reason why, I guess you could raise the question, why then doesn't every citizen pay equal the same for the water or the water cost, and it be broken out of the county and city budgets? I'll yield to Mayor Bragg, who does know something about this.
Well, I'm not necessarily, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kyle, if you look at the Rutherford County and you see what Murfreesboro charges inside and outside, and then compare that to Consolidated Utility District has 50% of the customers inside the city limits of Murfreesboro. That was a franchise agreement from 50 years ago, and it's not changed. And the city limit does or does not make a difference. If you look at it, you got neighbors that are paying $22 who are right next to neighbors paying $41. And I understand why water costs so much, because there are a lot of rules and regulations. There's borrowing costs, there's pump stations, gravity feed, water towers, you name it. And I just would say that as our property taxes are not equal, our water rates are not equal, our sewer rates are not equal, and it's whatever is up to those systems that can charge. And generally speaking, the funny thing about consolidation of those things is that most ratepayers in a well-kept system don't want to take over an ill-kept system whose rates possibly are less than the well-maintained system. And so that's the concern that I have in some ways. I look at Rutherford County and I think we all ought to be on the same system. It all ought to be consolidated. But my city residents, they're not going to want to pay that double rate just to go over to the consolidated system, and so I can understand that. They just don't want to take on that liability. And the other thing is, I really think that when the full faith and credit is involved of the city taxpayer, that outside the city taxpayer is only responsible for the rate and not for the full faith and credit. So in some ways I can almost see why there's a differential. Now, why 1.2% or 2 times or whatever rate, but this shows me right here that Consolidated Utility District has got higher costs because they've got fewer residents per mile in that district that they serve, and that's a huge district, so that's why their rates are more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Shumpert.
Just quickly, I just say, I think it's been said over and over, you cannot compare any two situations. But the city limit, it's got to be justified in my mind. And a city limit line in Knox County makes no difference. The city of Knoxville, the faith and credit is there for the utility district, but no other city. And it's just amazing how you get annexed and your rates go down. Nothing else has changed from a utility district standpoint. That's not right.
That's interesting. Mr. Caldwell.
Bob, in Davidson County, we use rate consultants. About every 3 years, they come in and look at our system and determine if our rates are sufficient to maintain the system. Do these other utilities not use a rate study consultant?
In our conferences and leadership efforts, including the one coming up, we encourage and we, in our process, take the position that within 3 to 5 years, a rate analysis should be done. And that can be done by good folks like Reftelis, CPA firms or engineering, but it should be done by some level of expertise. And every 3 to 5 years, you should do that to see what your cost of service is and see where you are. You may think you're fine when in fact you're bleeding. I would suggest that the majority of them are, but there is a segment that does not. And some of that may also be an ebb and flow of if I'm a small pocket system, whether I'm a city or a district or whatever, that little to no growth, et cetera, there may not be as much of a need. We recommend that you do it every 5 years just to make sure.
There's a fine point here, and I might not fully understand it. I may ask Lanice to phrase the question, but to Senator Kyle's point about in a municipal system, taxpayers funding the cost of a utility, a water utility, that may not be precise.
That is correct.
Could you explain that?
A utility, whether it's a municipal system or a district or whatever, must stand on its own and be funded through its revenues. You can't use general revenue or general tax money to pay for utility service inside a municipality. It has to have some sort of mechanism of revenue based on ratepayer.
Well, that's an interesting fact.
If I may also add to Mayor Bragg's comment about the utilities, I worked for a utility district that the neighboring utility district had higher rates. Wow. The simple reason was density. We had roughly the same amount of customers. You could reach every customer within 4-mile radius of my office. Unfortunately for my good friend who ran the other one, he couldn't reach them in a 25-mile radius. There's your cost.
Very interesting. Representative Carter, to that point. I'm sorry. Well, let me recognize Mike.
I'm sorry, Mayor. I just want to reiterate what you said, and that's what so many people seem to miss. This is a stand-alone enterprise based on rates.
Correct.
And are you aware that they require you to count your depreciation as a full loss? So if you install a great number of new lines, that actually costs you money on your balance sheet, and the comptroller's office will come back and make you raise your rates. If you have a loss 2 years in a row, you get a letter and says, if you don't raise your rates, we're going to come down, take over the board, and raise your rates. So if I want new trucks, new cars, and I want a little better system, all I do is count my depreciation in a different way through accounting principles, and then I get to blame it on those bad guys in Nashville.
And for example,
one of the few states that does that.
I recall this became an issue in Shelby County for some of the suburban municipalities several years ago in terms of separate enterprise funds to support municipal wastewater treatment, that some of the accounting had not been done correctly, and the comptroller's office, maybe you straightened them out on that. But this goes to that point. But it's one I feel pretty certain constituents in Representative Parkinson, Senator Kyle, and Senator Norris's district, they don't really think about where their water comes from or where their wastewater goes. They think it has something to do with MLGW or TVA, and that's about the extent of it. And that's not the case, as it turns out. Yeah, no, that's great. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Mayor Bragg.
And I understand the per mile, but our city residents are subsidizing the rural residential rates because there's 8 customers per mile maybe in the county and 800 customers per mile.
We're saying the same thing.
In the other side of it, and I understand that. But the other side of this, and I understand Representative Hill's contention that Piney Flats has got no voters. My CUD ratepayers in the city of Murfreesboro don't have any voters either because they're not covered by the city council, the county mayor, and we've already been through that discussion, picks those folks, and I think that's a great system. So I'm not sure that representation without taxation or benefit rate, whether you get elected by city council or whoever, makes a whole lot of difference because everybody's different. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And our last speaker here from MTAS, Alan Major, finance and accounting consultant. Alan, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Chairman, members. One good advantage about going last is a lot of people have already said what I had planned on saying, so that's good news. But directly to House Bill 600, I would say that if that bill passes, there will be $450,000 that the inside city customers will have to make up. So it's not just a freebie by any means. That's the amount of money that's currently being received by the county customers at 200%. So that won't be a free ride, and that won't be something easy to do. I'd like to say that MTAS believes that cities are legally different from utility districts. A utility district has customers in its service area only. A city has defined corporate boundaries, although it may serve water customers and do serve water customers outside the city. A city's water system is primarily owned by its customers. It's a little bit different, and you look at the engineering stuff, but we're an owner-based type system. And this may sound a little odd, but MTAS believes that cities have a mandate to create and charge a higher rate for utility service outside the city customer area, but only when there are additional costs to providing services to non-city customers. In other words, city customers should not subsidize non-city customers, and that's where we're different from a utility district. MTAS believes that each city's rate structure and cost of service delivery be considered separately without any limit on this inside or outside rate differential. We really think that the 150% differential might be unfair to some cities, as in the cost of constructing a water system varies across the state. It greatly depends on the geography, the conditions of the soil, the treatment requirements for raw water. Hilly terrain requires strategically placed water storage tanks. Simply put, again, a statewide limit might be unfair. We do believe that every city ought to be able to document any rate structure differential with the costs and the description of the reasons for an inside or outside rate differential. I've been doing rate studies since 1986, and I can promise you that I've done what we call a cost of service study, where we actually go in and determine what is the cost of that outside customer or those classes, what is the revenue generated by those customers, is it equitable? So we get that information. We don't do it very often, though. I will say this also, to the extent that the state limits an inside or outside rate differential, cities may have to increase the amount of their tap fee to non-city customers. Again, in this idea that we're not going to subsidize, if you go with the idea that we constructed something outside the city limits just for county customers, we'll normally get some of that infrastructure investment back through higher fees. If those higher fees are capped and the city believes they can't charge their city customers for that, their only thing left to them is a higher tap fee. Not very acceptable, actually, which is why we generally don't do that. We generally pass those higher costs in annual fees. Got some general reasons to think about for a inside-outside rate differential. Now, in principle, inside city customers are owners while outside city customers are non-owners. This is pretty well documented in the engineering magazines, books. Owners of the system are entitled to a fair rate of return on their infrastructure investment and their assumption of risk. The owners must deal with water permitting, EPA, potential fines. There are inherent costs and potential liabilities facing owners that never face non-owners. For example, the water system debt can adversely affect the interest rate on future general fund debt. You mentioned having some double-barrel bonds here. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. To the extent I issue new debt, even though it has nothing to do with the water or wastewater system, that there's going to be an incremental cost of that. I can't really quantify that, but I know it's higher. These costs of ownership are real, but often not quantified. But if I get into a situation where I'm doing a cost of service study, that is indeed when we quantify them. The owners of the water system are responsible for operations which must abide by state and federal regulations. That's a potential liability that's only borne by the water owners of the system, as non-owners may choose to purchase their water elsewhere. System development charges or capital recovery charges are not normally recouped from tap fees in Tennessee. Those costs are mainly recouped through future utility rate fees. Essentially, the city is selling its water fund's extra capacity. That extra capacity comes at the cost of building the water infrastructure larger than required for city-only service. Tap fees are generally low, often recouping the water hookup cost only. Higher outside utility rates are the main way Tennessee recoups that higher cost of infrastructure. Now, certain infrastructure may be built for outside customers only, such as water storage tanks located outside the city limits. So there is the obvious infrastructure outside the city limits, but infrastructure inside the city may need to be sized larger to accommodate the increased flows. So when I get into a cost-based system, I'm naturally going to charge anything related to the outside customers. But there is some of the internal system, the plant itself, that's been sized larger just to serve these outside customers. I'm going to take those costs and I'm going to separate those and I'm going to charge those to my outside customers in a cost of service type thing. Now, population density is usually less in the county, meaning that there's fewer water customers per mile outside the city. Meter reading, line monitoring, maintaining adequate water pressure, maintenance costs more per customer outside the city due to that extra distance. That's another reason why the cost of providing water per customer outside the city is always going to be more than inside the city. I was also asked how do cities actually raise rates. So most of the time, the initial rates are generally determined by the city and its engineer. Subsequent rate increases, which I've done several, we generally don't alternate or change the rate structure. We'd go in, determine the city needs 20%, they raise rates overall 20%. There's really no benefit from getting in and altering the rate structure, so typically we don't look at that. Sometimes they will look at the minimum bill versus the consumption rights. Most elected officials are pretty sensitive to that and want to keep the minimum bill as low as possible. Expansion of the water system usually leads to rate studies and rate increases. If the water expansion is solely for outside water customers, the entire cost of the expansion should be allocated to the outside water customers, resulting in a higher outside rate. Now, occasionally, MTAS will perform a cost of service rate study, which provides information relative to the cost to serve and the revenue produced by customer class, and inside versus outside customers. In addition to recommending an adequate rate increase, information would be developed concerning customer equity. The cost of service would be developed along with the revenue produced by customer classes within the city and outside. And ideally, these costs of service would be offset with the revenue produced by the customer class. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I'll open it up for any questions.
Yes, sir, Senator Henry.
Actually, if a city water system shows a profit after paying deferred maintenance, paying everything else, putting up a reserve of some kind, what happens to the money?
Well, if the city water system has profit, that money would be retained in the water system, used for future expenses and expansion.
Suppose you build up a larger reserve than needed. You still keep the reserve?
I've seen that occasionally where the city has built up too much money, if you will. It gets somewhat embarrassing. We can't give refunds, so in that case, we cut rates.
In the old city of Nashville, Mr. Carter will maybe correct me on this. In the old city of Nashville, it was said that the city water system produced a nice profit from time to time, which went in the general fund. Is that right, Mr. Cardwell?
Mr. Cardwell.
back in those days, the bonds issued were GO bonds. Any profit the water department might have had went back to the general fund to retire the GO bonds.
Mayor Beats.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alan, good to see you, and thank you for coming today. As I've sat here and listened to Alan and Joyce and Bob and everybody else talk today, Mr. Chairman, what I get out of this is, though we may have some different ideas, but everybody wants water rates to be justified, whatever that it is. I cannot see, with the differences in the water systems, the water utility districts, the Roane counties, the Shelby counties, how that we can say that one size or one law fits all. I just don't think what would apply to Piney Flats is going to apply to Kingston, Tennessee. So with all due respect to the representative, I don't think that House Bill 600 is a good thing for everybody. It might be a great thing for the people in Piney Flats, but I just can't see that. And one other little thing, we talked a lot today about outside water customers being represented by someone. Are they not represented by the members of the utility board? Do they not have the, at our place, they can come and fuss at the utility board because they're a customer. And that may not be what you might call representatives, but they absolutely have my ear when they come, if we do have. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate your remarks. Any other questions for Alan? I want to give Representative Hill an opportunity to respond, to close in a sense, if you will.
I promise it'll be brief. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I just wanted to very, very quickly, first say thank you, because the discussion's been better than anything I could have written out. So I think you all are, some of you hopefully are seeing exactly what we've been working toward for over a year on behalf of the folks in Pine Flats. Just want to clarify some things very, very quickly. Based on the 2012 annual financial statement of Johnson City, on page 207, what was said earlier, that there were no internal transfers that had been made from the water and sewer system into the general fund. According to their financial statement, the water and sewer is made a payment of $473,000 to the city. I mean, that's direct conflict to what was said, but it goes back to what the law actually says, that no municipality shall operate such public works for gain or profit, or primarily as a source of revenue to the municipality. Also, there was a statement that was made very, very quickly about grants. The ARA grant was actually $90,875. That's on page 176. There was also, from Sullivan County, on page 182 of this financial document, $119,894, a grant from Sullivan County, the Tennessee Economic Community Development, which is mainly from Sullivan County. So those are just a couple of very, very quick things. There's a few other items, but I've heard that you can overstay your welcome, so I'm quite content to just share those couple items real quick, and thank you all so much.
Thank you, Representative Hill. Thank you all very much. Well, Johnson City, come on, sure. We've had a good free flow of discussion
just
here.
As a point of clarification,
yes, sir,
on the payments, there is a requirement, as I understand it, through the comptroller's office. The general fund of the city does all of the payroll, HR, finance, all of those types of activities for the water sewer fund, and the utility or the water sewer is required to pay for those services which are provided by the general government of the city. The other point of explanation is part of that payment isn't in lieu of property tax payment, because there are physical facilities within the corporate limits of Johnson City that would normally be subject to a property tax, and there's an in lieu of payment agreement. So I apologize for the confusion I may have created, but I thank you for the opportunity to clarify that.
No, thank you, Mr. Peterson. I appreciate that.
Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While Mr. Peterson's up here, I noticed in your handout you had a complaint that was resolved, and I'm sure that the people who complained, the recourse they had was through the utility board, so they do have representation.
Our Johnson City Board of Commissioners acts as the board of the water and sewer utility. Yes, sir. So any customer with any complaint, challenge, whatever, is welcome to come in and file a complaint, ask to speak before the elected body at any point in time.
So if they're a customer, they're part of the system.
That is correct, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you very much. There's nothing for us to take action on at this time. The commission staff will come back with their report, presumably at the December meeting. Very interesting discussion, very enlightening. Senator Henry?
Mr. Chairman, a point of personal privilege. How many of you driving through Nashville on Highway I-40 have found it convenient to take 440 to get around downtown Nashville? Any ever do that?
Oh, occasionally.
Well, we have with us today the man who got 440 built, Mr. Ben Johnson, Mr. Ben Jones, right here.
Right there.
The commissioner at that time was a businessman from Knoxville. Bill, he was a very good businessman. What's his name?
Bill Sampson.
Bill Sampson, fine businessman. But he put Mr. Jones on the job of getting I-440 built. I-440 was to go through the territory in Nashville. It used to be part of my district, where the green people lived. It was the age of Aquarius then. And they didn't want that road built. Mr. Jones laid with them, and one morning, by golly, the bulldozers came out, the holes got dug, road was underway before they knew what was happening. And there it sits right there. Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Fantastic.
We did have a little showdown in federal court.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you, Senator Henry. Ben, good from asphalt to water. You've done it all. Renaissance guy. All right, we'll take this up again in December with the recommendations of TACIR. We thank you, Representative Hill, for that presentation. Thank you very much. Digress just for a moment here before we get into our folks for our next topic have been so patient, and I don't want to string them out anymore, but Representative Parkinson joined us right after we moved past the introductions, and as I said, in his absence, he has been newly appointed by Speaker Harwell, and you will see in your materials, I hope, behind tab 2, under commission updates, a little background on Antonio. At home we call him Touche. You can talk to him sidebar about the origins of that, but you'll also see that it says a retired U.S. Marine. The Marines I know never retire. Once a Marine, always a Marine, and a Desert Storm veteran. But he made a distinctive mark within months of his arrival in the General Assembly, passing meaningful legislation, and he takes his job very seriously, and we appreciate your willingness to serve here and look forward to doing so with you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. The second topic for today is a presentation concerning Senate Bill 624, concerning insurance in lieu of surety bonds. And again, a topic that is not top of mind really for just about anybody except for the entities, the governmental entities that have to buy this type of coverage. And Mr. John Evans, who is here, who brings it to our attention, and he'll speak here momentarily. I'm reminded that Senator Kyle made a very lawyerly comment several months ago about the distinction between insurance and surety bonds and what common law would and wouldn't allow us to do. And I sort of thought at that moment that might be about the end of the discussion because it sounded right to me. But as it turns out, as staff has dug into this, it's another one of these topics that there's always more to it. And we appreciate the opportunity to noodle through it a little bit. Nathan is here, our research associate, Nathan Shaver. I'll recognize you for the introductories.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to remind everyone, at the August Commission meeting, there was a brief presentation of what we knew at the time about this bill. Senate Bill 624 would allow insurance in lieu of the currently required surety bonds for certain public officials. At the conclusion of that presentation, the Commission requested proponents of Senate Bill 624 and other knowledgeable parties to come and speak to the Commission. Today we have 7 people who will speak and respond to questions from the Commission. First up, we have John Evans. He's the president of Next Generation Underwriters. Mr. Evans is a proponent of the Senate bill and has a long history of providing risk management for local governments. After that, we'll have Brian Hoffmeister. He's the Director of Policy Analysis with the Department of Commerce and Insurance. Followed by Joyce Welburn once again. She's a legislative auditor with the Comptroller's Office, and Ms. Welburn was responsible for the surety bonds that were filed with the Comptroller's Office. And then we have Sarah Heistand. She's Senior Counsel with the Attorney General's Office. She's worked with staff of the Comptroller's Office on surety bond issues in the past. Followed by Jack Spann. He's President of Spann Insurance. Mr. Spann has extensive experience providing insurance and surety bonds to local governments. After Mr. Spann, we'll have Becky Brock. She's Director of Member Services with the Local Government Insurance Pool. And concluding with John Calvin, who's the Director of Underwriting with the Tennessee Municipal League Risk Management Pool.
Thank you, Nathan. We'll go ahead and recognize then our first presenter, Mr. Evans, today. And as he approaches the podium, when this was first presented to Representative Todd and then to me, I recall at the time thinking it was a topic worthy of understanding but discussion, because it seemed to us that it was giving local governments in general, more opportunities. The question to begin with today, and I'll defer to your remarks, is this a solution in search of a problem? I mean, why is this worth pursuing? Thank you, Mr. Evans. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking up this topic. It is one that the earth sincerely will not stop turning if you don't come to a conclusion on this, or if you don't change the law. However, the reason this has come to light is because of several years of working with this on my part and the part of other people in the risk management industry and taking care of local governments. I've personally been in it for about 30 years now. And several of the other folks in here, my distinguished colleagues, have been here in this business for a long time. And hopefully, I'm looking forward to listening to them, because we're dealing with a quite complicated subject that is very difficult to define and very difficult to understand. And I suppose the first thing that I would like to, well, let me back up. The reason that I've pursued this is not for any other reason except that it's more complicated than it should be. It doesn't, in my estimation, and it's my opinion, I'll take that criticism wherever anybody wants to give it. It's my opinion that it doesn't add anything to the security that the local governments have with respect to their cash balances and that sort of thing, in respect of other bonds that they have also been purchasing for years and years. And it's more complicated and creates more red tape than it really should. So having said that, I want to clarify one thing. Surety bonds and insurance are the same thing. I don't know why we're contrasting the two, because it's a manner of transferring liability from one person to the other, or one entity to the other. So insurance and surety bonds are the same thing. It's just a matter of how the document is written and what it is we're handing off and under what circumstances. Having said that, we've had people vouching for people since time began. In the 17th century, there were requirements in some entities, governmental and others, where the individual who took a certain public office would have to get the assurance of, quote, quote, ladies, 2 good men to vouch for their character and the fact that they could handle the office and that they were of the correct character to handle the office. And honesty obviously was one of those. Well, in the 18th century is the first time that bonds appear in statute in Tennessee. And at that time, it was still another person to vouch, or a person who could put up a cash bond in varying amounts depending on the office and depending on what happened at the time. Well, that eventually evolved into, instead of having that individual, that's still allowed by the way, but instead of having the individual vouch for the public official, you could have a corporate surety. Well, a corporate surety is an insurance company who could guarantee whatever the penal amount of the bond was in the event there was a loss. Well, As hard as that is to understand, those bonds have gone through quite a metamorphosis over the years, but essentially when, and most of you are in politics in one way or the other, those who aren't elected are probably familiar with all this, it's almost impossible to get elected to some office without your entire life being vetted in the local newspaper. I think a lot of us can attest to that. So back in the days when the bond was required, it was in a time that the local newspaper just didn't have the resources to get out to all the reaches of the political subdivision to find out whether or not this person who was about to move into the office was the appropriate person. So a bond was required then. Nowadays it's a little bit different. We call this sometimes a third-party bond because it's one person guaranteeing the performance of another person to yet another person. But again, I don't think I've ever seen an insurance claim that wasn't at least a three-party situation. So I don't believe we can really say insurance and bonds are two different things. What is really the issue here that I wanted to talk about is that in the past years, and in all the years that I've worked in Tennessee, which is about 26 now, all of the public officials that are required to have bonds are required to have statutory bonds or public official bonds or individual bonds. They're called a number of things. But they can't be written on a blanket basis because they have to be written on a form prescribed by the comptroller. The comptroller's form says that the bond guarantees the faithful performance of the official, and it guarantees the proper transfer of records, and I'm sure Ms. Welborn will define that further, but bottom line, those are issues that are also covered by a blanket fidelity bond. It covers fiduciary responsibility of those occupying those offices. Also, way back when the bonds first came on board, you didn't have public official liability, you didn't have third-party liability policies, you didn't have public valuable papers and records coverage. You didn't have blanket fidelity bonds, surety bonds, or any of those things. It was we were lucky back then to have Lloyd's of London to insure ships, much less the operation of local governments. The bonds are required by Title 8 of the Tennessee Code. I'm sure we all know that from the information that was sent out. Performance bonds, which is another word for this, are defined by Webster's of bonds that protect the obligee from financial loss if the principal does not perform according to the bond form. Well, the bond form is what guarantees. It's a contract. So whatever the contract says, that's what happens when a loss occurs. The comptroller's form, the way it's written, has a power of attorney that basically hands over the responsibility of pursuing the bond to the comptroller's office so that they can, I'm assuming, prosecute the bond or get the money, the proceeds from the bond on behalf of the county, city, or whomever it is and give it back to the local government. Well, that's great, but there's also a bond that covers the same local official and probably 99% of every one of the local governments in Tennessee that does exactly the same thing.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Pull the mic up a little closer to you so that it's...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And I'll try to skip through some of this stuff to get to the meat of it. The bottom line, there's a better way to do it. There's an easier way to do it. There's a less expensive way to do it. We're always looking for ways to save money. I would like to know the objective of maintaining the two separate bonds. I haven't found anyone who can actually explain that. And up until the last legislative session, the only insurance that the state of Tennessee required a local government to buy was this performance bond. Every other area of insurance that local governments purchased was at their discretion. They could choose to insure, they could choose to self-insure, they could choose to not insure and pay the claims as they came along, but the only insurance policy they were required to buy was the performance bond, the individual public official's bond. Now, last session there was a new bill that was passed. I think it was Senate Bill 135 that not only doubled the amount of those bonds, but also required a $150,000 blanket fidelity bond, which, by the way, also covers the public official for $150,000. In the interest of trying to boil this down, I went back to the comptroller's reports of cash shortages and other thefts. They do that once a year. I was only able to go back 7 years on that. And during that 7-year period, I found 8 losses that may have been settled by an individual statutory performance bond like we're talking about. And I'm not sure about those because it's not kept up with that way. The comptroller does a wonderful job, but that's not one of the jobs that they do, is to tell me which bond resolved the issue. But out of those 8 losses over 7 years, the total amount was $137,546. And I can be corrected, certainly, because I'm not real sure about that. It's about $20,000 a year. And I don't know how much the premium was on those bonds, but it probably was more than $20,000 for all the governmental entities that local audit takes care of. If you look at those losses a little closer, and I went by the description of the loss that was written out by the comptroller's office, the lion's share of those losses were because of dishonesty, and the rest of the losses were faulty record keeping, and they were generally handled by the comptroller's office. They do a wonderful job of that, finding out where the money went, who took it, why it went there, and getting restitution. If during the past 25 years in the organization that I represent, we've had, in contrast, $104,000 per year in bond losses, as opposed to the $20,000 that were paid for by the public officials' bonds. These same bonds that we have cover those public officials in a secondary capacity to an individual bond, and could very well take the place of the public official bond. And I look forward to hearing what somebody else says on that. And contrary to what you may have been told, we do seek restitution in 100% of those claims, 100%. But we have to do it through the civil courts, because when the criminal courts award restitution, it goes back to the I guess you could call it the victim, which is the local government. In order for us to get our money back that we've paid on a bond, we have to actually sue our member and get a court order for our member to pay us back the restitution they get from the person who's been pronounced guilty. But we do pursue that in every case. Now, I presume since the beginning of time, and certainly since 1972, Tennessee's governmental entities have been allowed to purchase insurance or handle their risk management needs in any way they saw fit, with the exception of this one bond. They insure, or actually they have losses collectively of over $200 million a year. $200 million. And out of that, roughly about 20,000 is relative to these bonds. Well, I guess it begs the question, if they're capable of exercising their judgment on the $50 million building and the $100 million, or maybe the $10 million federal liability case, the Section 1983 U.S. Code case, or any of those, why are they not allowed to make the decision of whether to self-insure or buy insurance on their own public officials and their honesty? And I believe if you take a look at it, you'll see that we can double over with the bonds that they've already chosen to buy, not been forced to buy, but chosen to buy, and those bonds will be taken care of. It'll save them money. It'll save them time. At this point, those bonds have to be written on the comptroller's form. We sell those. We won't sell them if this thing, if 624 finds favor, and it'll cost us money. So this is not about money. For me, anyway, it's about money for the local governments. But these bonds that take place at this point, when someone tells me they want a bond, we take the comptroller's form, we send it to them, we have them complete that form, we have them complete the questionnaire, we look for a TBI report on that individual, that's the extent of the background check, we send it off to the insuring company, they have to sign this actual form, and the power of attorney. We get the form back, and up until last year, it had to go to the to the county registrar's office. It had to go to the comptroller's office, and of course the insurance company kept a policy, as we did in our office, along with the other policy that also covered that local official. So as of last year, the comptroller saw that they really didn't need to keep a copy of that bond, so in Senate Bill 135, that requirement was actually removed. So some of the red tape has been removed, but yet not quite enough. With that, I think I'll let the other folks talk a while. The whole purpose of this particular bill is to make things easier, and hopefully without any loss to or additional risk of assets to local governments. And I look forward to hearing the opinions of others.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Any questions for him at this time? We'll give you all another crack at him here as we get more deeply into it. That sets the stage nicely. Thank you. We'll hear next from Mr. Hoffmeister, Director of Policy Analysis in the Department of Commerce and Insurance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
My name is Brian Hoffmeister, and I am in charge of the Policy Analysis section for the Department of Commerce and Insurance. We are tasked with the review of insurance policies, life insurance, accident and health, workers' comp, and property and casualty, which is where this type of policy would fall. At the current time, there is no such insurance policy that covers exactly the same benefits as a surety bond. Surety bonds and insurance are a little bit different in the fact that an insurance policy will have deductibles, may have exclusions. And it's my understanding that a surety bond pays from the first dollar. With an insurance policy, if you have a $100,000 deductible per occurrence, then that's going to have to be paid by the entity, the policyholder in this case. Another difference is that the insurance policy is for the benefit of the policyholder, the governmental entity who purchases the policy. Is it possible to make an insurance policy cover exactly the same thing as a surety bond? Yes, it's probably possible. You would have to take the surety bond and take the current forms that are available and come up with special endorsements that would cover what you would like to be covered under the policy. As far as what the rates would be, I would have no way of knowing that because this is not coverage that's currently available. It's not been, the insurance companies haven't looked at the risk in this light, in this same manner. From the department standpoint, that's pretty much what we have on this issue. There are crime policies, there are burglary and theft policies that are written in the market today, but they do not cover everything that a surety bond covers, and they're not sold in the same light.
Okay, Brian, thank you. Question, Senator Kyle?
Just very briefly, sir, see if you can agree with what I'm getting ready to say, so you'll be different from Senator Norris. I've been told that the difference between a surety bond and insurance is the issue of intent, that one can't insure for an intentional act, but one can, therefore for instance, in my automobile, if I should negligently run over Senator Norris out in the garage, that's a matter of my auto insurance would pay that. But if I saw Senator Norris and thought about how he drug on that water debate much longer than he should have, and just decided to just put his days down for the rest of the time, and intentionally ran him over and then backed over him a couple times just to make sure I got all of him, that my auto insurance wouldn't pay that because that was not the agreement. The agreement was to cover me in case of tort. I accidentally did something, and therefore we all make mistakes. There's a difference between accidentally doing something and intentionally doing something, and that is the difference between insurance and bonding. I can agree with that. You can agree with that?
Yes.
Thank you. Are you agreeing with the part where we run over Senator Norris, or are you just agreeing with my policy? Thank you, sir.
I will leave that to the committee to decide.
That's sort of the threshold issue, not the me thing, but the intent issue, and whether that can be insured against. Questions? Additional questions? Yes, sir. Senator McNally.
You also mentioned the deductible. Can you write an insurance policy with a zero deductible?
Yes, you can, but the premium will be set accordingly with the fact that all of the risk at that point will be assumed by the insurance company with no risk at all assumed by the policyholder.
And you could not write the insurance policy to insure against an intentional act?
You would have to have a new endorsement on the policy to provide that. Currently, there is not that type of coverage available.
Okay.
I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but currently it's not available in the forms that are available for sale in the state.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Carter.
Does current law allow governments to self-insure with personal guarantees of the official now, so that there is in effect no premium whatsoever? I constantly in here expose my profound ignorance, and I hate to do it again today, but I'm not really sure if the intent here is to come up with a better form, because I'm afraid I'm with a senator from Shelby County. I'm a little confused about what we're trying to do. If it's save money, does the law currently allow the government to self-insure with a personal guarantee of that official, thereby avoiding all premium?
I believe somebody else is better equipped to answer that question, since it's outside the purview of actual insurance.
Safe answer. I'm not aware of any provisions that would do so, but
well, since a bond, a fidelity bond, is going to come back to the person they were insuring anyway, because it was an intentional act, and so the subrogation is going to come back to that official, why don't we just consider writing the insurance company out of the middle entirely and allow the county or the city or to self-insure with a written guarantee approved by the comptroller for that particular elected official to sign? Just a thought. I was involved in one of these with Mayor Ramsey right before I left and came up here, and it was very interesting, the approach to that, and I never understood why we had bought a bond, because it was so expensive. It looks like to me that since Hamilton County is self-insured, we would have done that. So I'm not sure it's allowed, or we may have, but just a thought.
Good thought. Good thought. Other questions for Mr. Hoffmeister? All right, thank you. Stand by. We'll hear from our next presenter. No stranger to this group today. Back with insurance, not water hat on.
I am always pleased to present before TACIR.
Even twice in one day?
It to be twice in one day.
There you go.
But that's okay.
Ms. Welborn, you're recognized.
One of the responsibilities of the Comptroller of the Treasury is to ensure that taxpayer funds are safe and protected. For many years, one method of ensuring that has been the requirement of officials to have surety bonds in place for their entire term of office. Our office has no opinion on whether insurance policies should be allowed in lieu of surety bonds. However, if an insurance policy is allowed, then it must provide the same coverage as a surety bond at the same or a reduced cost to the entity. The Department of Commerce and Insurance and the Office of the Attorney General must be satisfied that the requirements for adequate coverage are met.
A common sense approach. Questions for Ms. Welborn? Okay.
That was much easier
The
than
plot
water.
thickens. Well, so far, but you can see the furrowed brows around here. We sort of
Come on, y'all.
going around the same circle here. Yes, sir, Mayor Beats.
Thank you again, ma'am, for standing in there and taking this. But did I hear you say that if we didn't do a surety bond and we did an insurance, then it would have to cover exactly the same as the surety bonds do?
It would have to provide the same coverage because remember, our goal in the comptroller's office is protection of taxpayer money. And the surety bond does that.
And I just heard the gentleman in front of you say that if we had an insurance policy that did that, that it would probably be cost prohibitive. And that's my term, cost prohibitive, but is that not what I heard him say?
I didn't hear that, but...
Well, tell me what I heard.
It's an open question, and I think when we... And we'll let her respond. I think when we hear from Ms. Highstand in the AG's office, that may shed some light on it.
And I just don't see how they can be the same if they require them to be the same at the same cost or not. And all I've heard is the insurance policy is higher.
We, as was stated in the last presenter, there is not an available policy in the state of Tennessee. So we really do not know what that cost will be. We do know that the requirements will have to be the same coverage for an insurance policy as for a surety bond, whatever it takes. We're not opposed to it.
Understand. Thank you for letting me add to the confusion, Mr. Chairman.
That's okay. You're just like all the rest of us. We're all confused about it. So.
Yes, Senator Henry, you're recognized.
If somebody who's subject to this law is a convicted embezzler and he just got out of prison and he can't find anybody who'll write him, do you all write him somehow?
If he cannot be bonded, he cannot take office. That is in the statute.
That's it. Thank you.
Now, this last election, I believe it was, we had an 18-year-old girl elected as county clerk, and she had a hard time finding a bond. We had several years ago, we had a county clerk in an East Tennessee county that was convicted of stealing like $90,000. He personally repaid the $90,000. It did not go against the bond.
Curiouser and curiouser. Yes, sir, Senator Henry.
We do insure dead horses, the state does. 10K is a good example.
May we quote you on that?
I'm not going there.
You're covered even if you're dying of cancer when your coverage begins.
Okay.
I mean, that's it.
Okay. During all of our research, we were told, now I'm not an insurance expert, I'll tell you that right now. We were told that a surety bond, if a claim is made against a surety bond after the person leaves office, then the surety bond can pay. In an insurance policy, it stops at the date of expiration of the insurance policy, which is the end of term of office. In our office, the audits are sometimes not done before the end of the term of office. So the insurance policy could not be made claim against.
You'd have to have the equivalent of some kind of tail coverage.
Absolutely.
Is the
we have
equivalent.
To have something.
All right. Well, hold on to that thought. Hold on to that thought. We're going to hear from the AG's office, Senior Counsel Sarah Highstand, and you may be able to touch on some of these points that have furrowed more brows.
It's possible. I'm Sarah Highstand from the Financial Division in the Attorney General's office, and I'm here because there's a very simple job given to the Attorney General to review the bond forms for legality after the comptroller writes them up. And these bond forms are based on a form that the legislature has stated. It already provided what the basic 4 sentences are that are needed for the term of the bond. The faithful performance of the official, turning over records, turning over money during the term of office or after the conclusion of office. And the legislature has said exactly what needs to be in the bond, and it has provided a couple chapters of parts of Chapter 19 and Title 8 to explain exactly how the bonds work. And this has been in place for almost 150 years, a lot of it, how the bonds work. So, and like the comptroller's office, we don't have an opinion as to whether there ought to be insurance instead of these bonds. It's just that the issue right now is the officials have been required to have these bonds for 150 years. It used to be personal guarantees, then followed by insurance companies issuing surety bonds. And now you're trying to come up with, is there something that could be equivalent from the insurance side to the surety bond? Any official right now does not even have to get a bond if they can put up the penalty sum for the bond. Or some of the officials maybe have to put up $100,000 or $50,000. If they can put that up themselves as a cash deposit, they don't even need the bond. So the issue for the Attorney General's office in reviewing the bond forms of the comptroller so far has been extremely easy. It just looks at what's the official, what's the statute that governs the official, are there additional requirements of statute, but in general the language is the same. The official himself or herself signs it and says, I will do the faithful performance, and I have this surety company to back me up. What that also means is that the surety company, if the official does not faithfully perform the office, probably can be sued by the surety company to get that money back. So that's slightly different from the insurance policies right there, in that when an insurance policy pays out, you may or may not have the insurance company come back against the person covered to obtain the funds. So the issue with the new legislation being proposed for an insurance policy to take the place of this long set of statutes about how these bonds work, who can sue on them and for what, requires making sure that the insurance policy, one, is there. As you've heard right now, there is no commercial policy yet that does exactly what the bond now does. And then making sure that the terms of those insurance policies cover what you have covered already by your stated terms in the legislation. And I just wanted to point out that one of the very important statutes is who can sue on the bonds now is not limited. It's not limited to the county that has maybe paid some of the premium. It's any person. It says that the bonds are for the use and benefit of every person who is injured, as well by any wrongful act committed under color of such an officer's office as by the failure to perform or the improper or neglectful performance of the duties performed by, imposed by law. What that means is that your statute already is providing for a possible, not just wrongful or criminal conduct, but there's some implication about it being for improper or neglectful conduct. So if you're trying to come up with a system to replace these bond statutes, you have to make sure that it's explicit as to who can sue on it. Does it cover this exact same set of duties? And also, does it cover the same dollar amounts? Because right now you have all kinds of different statutes on the dollar amounts for each office. And so you can't wave a magic wand and say their insurance policy will be there to cover those things. It requires actually very specific work to make sure that you have captured every office that now has a bond and make sure that you provide in the statute for what exactly you want covered. And Senate Bill 624, it had an alternative language in it. It provided for government crime coverage, employee dishonesty, or equivalent coverage that ensures the faithful performance by officials. And those are somewhat different riders on insurance policies when we're looking around at blanket bonds to see, well, what would possibly cover the same conduct. And a crime policy is one thing, and neglectful conduct is another type of policy. So from the point of view of the Attorney General, right now we do a very easy thing. But if it came to having to judge whether an insurance policy was serving that same purpose or even a form insurance policy. As Mr. Hoffmeister said from Commerce and Insurance, it's probable that something could be developed, but it's much more complex given deductibles, exclusions, what is the proper language for this. And finally, another thing about officials is that they have a term of office, and as you were talking about tail policies, with the term of office has to be fully covered. Right now it's covered on the bond, one bond for a term of office, and they have to get another bond for another term of office. But if you have insurance policies, they tend to run annually or some other period of time, and you don't want to have the situation you have now, which is if an official does not have a bond, technically their office becomes vacant or could become vacant. So if you're going to replace this statutory scheme that's been there 150 years, you might have to replace it completely to make sure you don't have any implication that offices are vacated, or to provide for all the things that the current statutes provide for and how the bonds work. So that was our observation from reviewing these very simple forms so far.
Thank you, Ms. Heastand. Questions for Ms. Heastand? Again, sort of brings us back, having heard all of that, to, is this a solution, you know, in search of a problem, or is the situation we have adequate? And that'll take us back to the industry itself, I guess, that could say, look, this would be much simpler and more cost-effective for local governments if we could just do away with what they may consider, and maybe Mr. Spann will address this, sort of an archaic, yeah, it's been there for 150 years, and we get this in court all the time, that we'll cite a law from 1830, and the opposition will say, oh, that's an old case. Well, usually that means it's a really good case because it's still good law, but not always. Sometimes it's out of date and archaic, and it's time to be overturned. So that seems to be sort of the crux of the matter here today. Any questions then for Ms. Heastand? Seeing none, hearing none. Thank you. Stand by. We'll see what comes up. Mr. Spann, I can't imagine whether you're a proponent of this, coming from the insurance industry. Mr. Cardwell, as he approaches, I'll recognize you. Well, you get in position there. Let me recognize Mr. Cardwell here as you get to the podium.
It was said earlier that it took two good men to vouch for someone. I have one big man that can vouch for me. Since 1980, Jack has written my surety bond. And I want to report out that he's never had one claim against that bond. Right, Jack?
That's correct, Charlie, but if you remember, you and I have a deal. If you run off the money, I get to go with you.
Oh, okay. I forgot about that, yeah.
I figure that's as much a deterrent as anything could be.
It's a great introduction. You are recognized, Mr. Spann.
My name is Jack Spann. We have a family insurance business here in town, and contrary to what it says in the bio, I am not the president of our family business. My 84-year-old mother is, and I had to get permission from her to come down here, and I promised not to stay too long. So, our business. We have been in the insurance business, and we primarily are in the insurance business since my father formed our agency in 1951. We do have a specialty in bonds that we have acquired over the years, and our agency probably writes 10,000 bonds a year of different types, from notary bonds to very complicated performance and construction-related bonds, to Charlie Cardwell's $16 million bond as the trustee for the city of Nashville. And I'm very disappointed to find out that he has now been advised he could just put the cash up and not have to get a bond. I was approached several months ago by your fine staff at TACIR to answer some questions about bonds and insurance as they were doing their due diligence to prepare for this meeting. And we have had both meetings in my office and telephone calls and emails, and I feel flattered that they would consider me a resource to come down and speak to you. And I'm here to answer some questions. I do have some comments, but I'll be glad to entertain any questions that you might have. I was shocked to hear Mr. Evans say that bonds and insurance are about the same. I've been occasioned over the years, been able to speak to a number of industry groups and people to teach them about bonds, and the first thing I tell them is you have to get out of your mind that bonds and insurance are the same thing. They are vastly different. And the information you've provided in one of your memorandums that was prepared by Jeff Price, I believe, does a great job of outlining that. I saw it for the first time today, and it's an extremely informative document that I would urge you to look at, because it will certainly show that insurance and bonds are anything but the same thing. One of the big distinctions, which was just raised a moment ago, is a bond, unlike an insurance policy, is not cancelable. We provide, by virtue of having been the low bidder for the city of Nashville in 2010, every insurance agent in town is able to bid on them. We were the one that needed the money the most, so we bid the cheapest. And we got all the city bonds, including Mr. Carwell's $16 million bond as the trustee. And that bond is not cancelable. I've never seen an insurance policy that's not cancelable. His bond for a 4-year period is not cancelable. If I read in the paper in the morning about how Charlie's gone crazy and is doing stupid, silly things, we can't issue a notice of cancellation on that bond for any reason, including non-payment of the premium. If the city of Nashville stopped paying the premium, we couldn't cancel it then. That's how a surety bond of this type works. The bond was drafted by the AG's office, and it has certain language in it, and nowhere in that language does it say we can cancel the bond. An insurance policy always has a way for the insurance company in some shape, form, or fashion to either non-renew the bond at the end of the annual premium, annual period, or cancel it midterm under certain conditions. So that is a significant difference when you're talking about having the protection of taxpayer money, to know that that bonding company is on the hook for that period of time for that elected public official or appointed official's time. Mr. Evans made the comment that bonds, or that this is a complicated situation that needs this bill to address the problems that are associated with being so complicated. Again, using my good friend Charlie Cardwell as an example, when he applied for his bond, he had to complete this 2-page document, which he completed in a matter of minutes, signed, gave to me. I sent it to the surety company underwriter. The next morning we had approval for a $16 million bond. We then issued a policy, or an insurance bond, the bond for the public official bond that the AG's office requires, which again is a 2-page document. If it didn't have so many signatures on the back of it, it'd be a 1-page document. It was a very simple, quick process. Now, it was made simple and quick by the fact that Charlie Cardwell never has thought about paying a bill late, and that he handles his affairs in a very, very responsible manner. And when you're talking about getting a bond for somebody like him, it is pretty simple, because he handles things in an appropriate manner. And most people do. Of the 10,000 bonds a year that I mentioned we write, we probably run across 50 or 60 circumstances a year that we can't write a bond for somebody. So it's a very low number. So to say it's a complicated process mystifies me. I didn't hear any examples of why or how it's so complicated. When we're talking about this bond, as was previously alluded to, the verbiage in the bond that says what the surety company is responsible for is bonding for the faithful performance and duties of the elected official, that they will keep records and accounts for all the monies that they come in their possession. There are no exclusions. There are no other conditions. There are no cancellation provisions. It's a very simple form. The state of Tennessee and the people at TACIR were nice enough to provide me a copy of the insurance policy that the state of Tennessee purchases, which is a governmental crime policy, for $3 million as far as the benefit. Again, Charlie's bond is $16 million. But the state of Tennessee purchases each year a policy for $3 million, which is a crime policy, an insurance policy. And they gave me a copy of it. And I could sit here and go through the nearly 30 pages of what Mr. Evans seemed to indicate would make it less complicated. But we got an insurance policy that's 30 pages long that the state of Tennessee purchased. And every page has something to do with a condition associated to this policy as far as when there's coverage. The bond form by the AG's office accomplished that in 2 pages. 2 simple pages. And I can assure you, when insurance companies are attaching all these endorsements, it's not in favor of the insured. The question was raised earlier, could you write an insurance policy to be the same as a bond? You can write an insurance policy on a 355 card that says we cover every darn thing. And that could be the extent of the policy. But that's not what they do. They go through and they attach all sorts of exclusions to a policy. And this particular one has a provision in it that kind of addresses the issue of a faithful performance bond. There has an endorsement in this policy where they take the limit of $3 million and reduce it to $1 million. And they add coverage for the faithful performance of employees. And it says in the first section that it's going to cover the faithful performance of employees. Then in all the other sections, it has exclusions and conditions that remove that coverage and take it away under those conditions. That's not what the form that the JG's office has, because there are no other exclusions or any exclusions in that form. I would like, and I'm sorry nobody did it, I would like for someone to have asked the AG's office, are you going to draft the insurance form that has to be used? They drafted the bond and did a really good job of it because it protects the taxpayers' money. Who's going to draft the insurance form? When I was asked by the TACIR people to compare the bond to the insurance policy, I said, well, give me the insurance policy so I can look at it. Well, there is none. Well, so why is this committee meeting then? If you're trying to decide whether insurance policy might be a better option, let's see what the insurance policy says. Because we can't compare it to a bond or anything else unless we're able to look and see what in the world it actually covers. So I'm a little puzzled that it's got this far in the process because there's nothing except hypothetically say, we got an insurance policy out here that we're going to make available at an unknown price, providing unknown coverage. My question is, let the people who've already done a good job on the bond draft the insurance policy. I don't think they're going to be receptive to wanting to do that.
It's a little bit of chicken and egg, I suppose. I mean, the first question was whether it was worth pursuing, I guess. And are you familiar with this having been done in any other states? I presume not.
No, sir. I'm not. Okay. As I said, I'm just a common old independent insurance agent.
Yeah, I can tell.
So I'm not that versed. I'm the only one that's not getting paid to be here, Mr. Chairman. I'm the.
Either are a lot of us.
I'm just happy to be here. But if you let the insurance company design the insurance policy and draft it, it will not be drafted to protect the policy to the taxpayers' money. It'll be drafted to protect the insurance company's money. And I would urge you not to allow that to happen. The other thing I would like to mention is that we're talking about bonds that are provided by insurance companies that are rated by AM Best Company with A ratings, that are insurance companies that have to be filed and admitted with the state of Tennessee and are under extreme regulation. Your bill allows for pools to provide this coverage. I would submit that would be very, very dangerous. Pools do not have the same protection. They are not covered under a guarantee fund, which we have in Tennessee. Insurance companies are, that, when we're talking about writing an insurance policy. It would be very, very dangerous because they don't have the rating. Bonds, and we're getting back to bonds now, leaving insurance, going back to bonds. Bonds, you have certain bond companies that are approved by the United States Department of Treasury. That is what we call T-listed, Treasury listed. That the state of Tennessee requires that bond companies who write bonds for like through TDOT for construction projects, for roads. They have to be Treasury listed. If this bill was to proceed, I would urge you to remove the provision about where pools could be involved, or if you have to leave it in, require that that pool be rated by AM Best Company with an A rating or Standard & Poor's, or at least Treasury listed by the United States Department of Treasury. Because to not do that, you're not going to get the same protection, because you can have an insurance policy that says just exactly what I said a moment ago. This covers everything. But unless that insurance company is there to back it up, then you don't have anything. I'd be glad to entertain questions you might have, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Henry.
Thanks, Mr. Span. Just so I understand, if you do have not Mr. Cardwell, if you say you had a dishonest trustee somewhere in the state, and a claim is made, who pays that claim? Not your agency, some company pays it, right?
Yes, sir, Senator. We're just merely the agency that places the business with an insurance company.
Now, when you place that business, do you always place with a company rated A by Best?
Our agency does, yes, sir.
So?
Yes, sir, our agency does. And in Nashville, we don't have the option because they require that as part of their requirements, that it must be an A-rated company.
Well, other people in the state in your type of business, they may not be required to place business with A-rated companies. Is that right?
I would think unless the particular county or that was requiring it didn't have a requirement to that effect, someone could write it with a lower-rated company.
Should the law require that such bonds be placed with A-rated companies?
I certainly think so, because it's too easy for them to go become insolvent. And another important issue, and this is a subject matter that for a different bill, somebody may want to grab this and sponsor it. I'd support that. Surety companies do not come under the state guarantee fund. So if a surety company goes broke, whether it be providing a bond for a public official or for a car dealer or for anything else, there is no protection under the state guarantee fund for that. Now, if they're writing an insurance policy, as I alluded to earlier, that would come under the state guarantee fund.
Thanks. So, Mr. Chairman, that's something you may want to look into, a requirement of that kind.
Making a note right here.
You will not make any friends in the insurance industry, I can assure you that, with that bill.
We're used to that too. Even with Chairman Sargent here, we're used to that. All right. Anything further for Mr. Span? Senator Kyle.
Since we have
recognize Senator Kyle first.
No, I'll yield to your Chairman Sargent to muddle up the waters.
No, I'm really not going to try to do that. I will say Jack is a constituent of mine, and you probably did a better job than most explaining exactly the difference. And if you have nothing to compare it to, and I was sitting here thinking the whole time, if you have nothing to compare it to, you have nothing to really look at. I mean, we just, no one on this committee or no county or no official would know that. So, if you want to go ahead and instruct the department to try to write a policy, and then we look at it a year from now, I don't know if they'd like to do that either.
Right.
So,
that wasn't my desire to do that. I wanted to talk about these very topics, this concept here, and see whether it's worth pursuing.
I understand, but he's probably Jack is probably one of the experts when it comes to bonds right here in Davidson County anyway, and I know that because I've used him before to do bonds that we do not do. So, Jack, thank you for being here.
Sir Kyle.
Jack, we've been talking, without getting into proprietary information, generally speaking, what does a bond cost? I guess it's rated by per thousands or per 10,000s, or what kind of money are we generally talking about?
Well, the bond premiums they're scaled and they can differ. There are bonds that we write that some of them are $50,000 bonds for public officials that are a couple $100. Mr. Cardwell's bond, it's public record how much the bond premiums are. So his bond that the city pays for a $16 million bond is $10,050. I haven't seen any $16 million liability policies for $10,000. That's an annual premium. That's an annual premium. The City of Nashville wanted to pay them annually.
Great. Those are good examples. Well, we talked about pools here a little bit, and Mr. Spann, I see that we have Becky Brock here, local government insurance pool, and if we could hear from her, and then John Calvin, and then Mr. Evans again to close.
Hello.
Yes, welcome. Good to have you here. Thank you for being with us.
Thank
Becky?
you for having me. I'm going to try to stay in my 7-minute time frame.
And you have to pull that mic real close to your, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Better, yes.
I am representing the local government insurance pool and our sponsoring organization, the Tennessee County Services Association. We take the needs of county governments very seriously and would support any bill that we felt like would make their jobs easier and save them money. Upon close review of this bill, we agree that the intent is to help simplify the statutory requirements of local government officials. The issue we have is the unknown. There are significant differences, we feel, between employee dishonesty policy that we currently provide our members and a surety bond that public officials are required to have now. We're aware that historically there have not been a lot of bond claims, but we don't feel like we can use that data as an actuarial basis for what would happen in the market if the bonds change to insurance. We do feel like it will be easier for public entities to file insurance claims versus a claims against a bond, or that's our fear. We just don't know what kind of impact it will have on our loss fund or our reinsurance cost, which is what we determine is how we determine the premium that we charge our members. And we don't know. This is additional coverage to us. It's higher limits than what we provide now. So again, we don't know how that will impact what we will charge. There's also a chance of an increase in third-party claims under our liability policy. Even if they're unwarranted, there's a cost to defend those claims. With the information we have now, we just can't say with any degree of certainty if this bill will save our members any money. A public entity pool is created to allow members to pool their resources together, to share losses in the savings on expense costs, and to maintain a stable alternative to insurance companies that are looking for big profits. Pools do not profit from our members. That's why we feel it's very important that Tennessee public entity pools and their board of directors maintain the unregulated freedom to just make decisions to do what's right for our public entities. That's all I have. Any questions?
Questions? Mayor Waters?
From your perspective, do you think there's any urgency that we pass a bill similar to what we're talking about? Do you see...
No, sir, I do not feel that there is. Not with the wording of this bill.
And let me ask you this. Do you think the pool would support further investigation to see how this bill might impact local governments, or in the alternative, maybe a bill that would fill some of the loopholes or some of the holes that we've talked about here today? And it just seems like that there's a lot of questions, more questions than answers. And how would you all feel about that?
Yes, sir. That is something that we would prefer to see, a different bill possibly that would address all of the holes that we see currently.
Other questions? Becky, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And last but not least, John Calvin, Director of Underwriting, TML Risk Management Pool.
Thank you for listening to me today. My presentation has become a lot shorter after listening to everybody else. There's a lot of redundancy. But I would like to give you a little perspective on where we come from. We are a pool that insures municipal governments and entities. So we have about 495 entities across the state. Most of those are cities and towns, so the bond requirements are a little bit different for them. But we also exist and owe our existence to fulfill the intention of the pooling requirements under the Governmental Tort Liability Act. And that's how we do strategic decisions and how we make our daily decisions as we go along. It seems to me like the issue with the bond, and I really have to agree with a lot of the comments that Mr. Spann made. A a bond has been in existence for 150 years in Tennessee as a requirement for the officials. So it exists in a certain environment, that's what I would say. And that environment has to do with coverage precedents and the legal environment that surrounds it, and the insured's attitudes towards making claims. If you try to take the wording of a bond, which is basically, and as Jack was saying, failure to perform your duties, and you take that wording and you put it in an insurance environment, which is, pardon my explanation, but very litigious, very visible, very attackable. And it doesn't have the same kind of precedents that are set in the bond market. If I took that wording and put it in an insurance policy, for instance, I have a fidelity policy that covers first party only losses for employee dishonesty. The bond language would expand that to cover losses for third parties also, and that's an important part of the law. I also, on my errors and omissions policy, which is written to cover errors, omissions, failure to do your duty for third parties, I think if I took that bond wording and stuck it in there without the exclusions that I have on that policy, I would cover everything that results from an error of that officer. So my policy would exponentially expand and become very broad. So the key to doing that would have to be to determine exactly what you want a bond to cover. I mean, and this is the way insurance works. You list what you want it to cover. If you want it to cover dishonesty, it's one thing. If you want it to cover faith for performance, what in that environment of a bond does that actually cover? And the other side of that is that there's incentives built into a bond because it's really just a guarantee of credit. If somebody offends that bond, they're going to wind up paying that out of their pocket back to the bond company because the insurance company doesn't have the ability to do that, or they can do it, but it's much more difficult. I think that you would wind up with a lot more expenses for the insurance company to pay those losses. There is the possibility that you could write a form that would cover everything that's covered by the bond. But it would be complex and it would be difficult to do because of the broad language in that bond. There is also the possibility that you could make it easier for an insurance company to recover losses that they paid by having restitution paid directly to them instead of to the victim. If we've already paid for the claim, it makes sense that the insurance company could get paid back. And I think Mr. Evans mentioned that as a possibility, and I think that would be sensible. My feeling is that unless you can really strictly define what is going to be covered by that insurance and how it fits into the other types of property and casualty insurance, you're going to wind up with a lot more claims, a lot more dollar payouts, and that translates into premium. So I'm afraid that's what would happen. In conclusion, I don't really feel that the pool has made a decision that we don't have an opposition to it. If you can come up with the kind of policy that provides the same coverage the bond has historically provided, then that would make sense. And if you can do that for a similar cost to benefit ratio, you may pay more premium, but if you get more benefit, maybe it's still a good deal, and the insureds can make that decision because they're still going to have bonds as an option. Then something might make sense there. But based on the unpredictability and the lack of that standard wording, our current decision is that we would not write this type of coverage in the TML pool. We would have to wait and see what that coverage looked like, get some actuarial studies, determine how it would affect us, and then make a decision at a later point. So,
Mr. Calvin, I'll recognize Representative Carter. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Calvin. Let me ask you this. Since the Tennessee Municipal League has limits established by the Governmental Tort Liability Act that Mr. Spann doesn't fit under, and he has to live in the real world, are your premiums charged to Tennessee cities and towns, are they based upon actuarial studies?
Yes.
Just like insurance companies do?
Yes, and there's really two pieces to that. Based on the Governmental Tort Liability Act, there are certain immunities that have been taken away.
Right.
If you get into a out-of-state case or a federal case, those immunities don't apply, so you have more unlimited liability. So we write we write limits at two different levels, one for things that are under tort law and one that covers everything else.
All right.
But we determine premiums the same way an insurance company would.
Okay.
Actuarial studies, we have audits of our financials. Everything.
Mr. Spann brought that to mind during his talk. Let me ask you one final one, if I could, Mr. Chairman. Are any premiums you charge, the TML charges the cities, are they used for any purpose other than defending cases, paying judgments, and the administration of that program?
Not that I know of.
Who would know if you don't know?
I would say you'd have to talk to our upper management.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mayor Bragg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given the testimony that I guess Mr. Evans gave, that a lot of people are paying premiums and not many claims come out, looks like there is an opportunity there. Obviously, based on the electorate choosing good elected officials as a given, does that entice you anymore, given the fact that and I didn't get too much testimony from Mr. Spann over how many of those surety bonds got paid, whether they were TDOT bridges or TDOT roads or whatever else. But I know in our city, during the most recent indiscretion recession, we did go against bonding companies and did have some difficulty recovering because they're not interested in paying anymore most times than the insurance companies are. But does it appear that there is a market there?
Well, I believe that the incentive of restitution keeps people from making bond claims. I think if they didn't have to pay it back and they didn't have to face public scrutiny because of their failure to perform, there would be a lot more claims. So if the insurance company can't get that restitution from the offender, it's not going to be a good deal for us. We also feel that, I mentioned in the beginning that our existence is based on the Governmental Tort Liability Act, and this kind of takes us out beyond that, and that's not something that we take lightly. So that's one of the reasons we decided that we would not pursue it.
I was going to say, further to your point, Mayor Bragg, I think that Mr. Calvin had a couple of caveats which sort of were the underlying premises of Mr. Evans' point. It's optional, and if it could be pursued, and if it could be done, you said for the same, but I think what we were hoping is be for less premium, and it's optional. Nobody would mandate that kind of coverage if it could be written. I just wanted to know, whether there's anything like this elsewhere, and whether folks were unalterably opposed to the idea of giving it a go. I understand it's a foreign concept, and it doesn't sound as though it's being done elsewhere. But if those caveats could be met, and you had a lower premium, in fact, for the equivalent coverage, it might be a product worth considering.
Under the right circumstances, yeah. I think it could be, yeah.
All right. If there's nothing further from Mr. Calvin, then Mr. Evans, would you like to close? Maybe answer a few follow-up questions now that people are...
Well, I'd be happy to answer a few questions. But first of all, that was obviously a really bad idea. So I'm sorry to take your time with it, judging from the comments we've had. But I believe there are a lot of other questions to be asked and a lot of other avenues to be pursued. First of all, I've never advocated replacing surety bonds with an insurance policy. I never said that. That mantra was taken on by others who took off on that idea. That's not the objective. My objective, actually, Senate Bill 624 is actually a compromise bill. My suggestion is to do away with the surety bonds altogether, the individual surety bonds, and put all of those under a blanket, since all of those losses that I was able to look at for 7 years would have been covered under a blanket surety bond, and then raise the limit to $400,000 as 624 does, which gets the higher level claims. That was my suggestion, not to replace a surety bond with a or a public official bond with an insurance policy. There's a lot of technical information here that it would take us hours and hours to get out, and a lot of research needs to be done. The program that I represent has covered faithful performance for 26 years, and we've never had a claim on faithful performance. And a lot of you folks here are lawyers. If you go in and try to make a case in court, and I'm not a lawyer and don't pretend to be, but if you went in and tried to make a case on whether or not the mayor of Cocke County, did or did not faithfully perform the duties of his job with no further explanation, clarification of coverage or anything else, how much luck would you have doing that? You say that loose language covers everything, but yet it covers nothing unless you can perfect the language in the courts. So, in other words, we need a lot of research, and I would suggest, Senator Norris, at this particular point in time, that maybe some research needs to be done within the Comptroller's office. Actuarial studies going forward, suggestions, or selecting numbers out of the air to try to decide what a price would be on such an alternative product. I'm not advocating an alternative product. I'm advocating a simpler way to do it. But even if we did that, insurance companies look at history to predict the future with respect to rates. So what we need to do is not guess at what happens going forward with a different program. What we need to do is look at what actually happened in the last 20, 25 years through the audit reports that we've got, and do enough research there to find out how much premium did we pay for these surety bonds or public official bonds, and how many claims did we actually have? $137,000 in the last 7 years? How much were those premiums? And by the way, Metro Nashville self-insures. They do individually what pools do collectively for those entities who aren't big enough to do it on their own. But they do buy a surety bond on a separate bid, and I participated in that one too. But anyway, I'll be glad to answer any questions you have, but my suggestion at this point would be to do more research and let's wait on 624.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Any comments or questions there? Ms. Center?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question about, Mr. Spann gave us an example of the complexity of the insurance application and then the surety bond, 2 pages. Does everyone use the 2-page AG surety bond application?
Oh, the AG didn't prescribe the application. The application is consistent with what the insurance company requires.
Across the board.
Yes, but it's typically the same. They ask basically the same questions. Have you ever been bankrupt? Have you been involved in this and that? And give us your specific information so we can threaten you with a background check, which they never do. Otherwise, you wouldn't get approval overnight for a $16 million bond unless you just check the TBI files, which is what they typically do. So I don't think if your question is alluding to or asking, is there a significant background check done on each elected official? No.
Oh, it's just the complexity, the 2 pages versus 30-something.
The complexity is 2 pages and sending to the insurance company and back to the comptroller and registrar and all of those folks, rather than issuing an insurance program that includes a fidelity bond.
Thank you.
That the local governments would already have done.
Thank you.
Mr. Evans, I appreciate this. I remember several years ago somebody came to me with an idea about something called a captive insurance company, and people sort of scrunched up their faces and said, well, what in the world's that? We don't need any of those things. And now it's one of the greatest things going on in the state of Tennessee. So I appreciate your thinking outside the box about this, and I think we can pursue it as you suggest. It may be something, just because we've had bonds around for 150 years and good statutes and all that, a lot of us just take that for granted. That's the way it's done. There may be a better mousetrap.
Next time, I think I'll go last.
Thank you very much. All right. Tomorrow, we reconvene at 8:30 in the morning. Take up, I know you're all chomping at the bit to get back to 1101 and annexation, and Representative Carter and Bo Watson. You've mentioned the A word several times today. There is a very good working draft of the report that's going to be discussed, and you need to check what was previously mailed out has been replaced by a revised draft, and there are copies on the table if you don't have the revision. And if you're not sure, make sure you get this one. That's why it came out Monday. Right. This is this week's. Right. Yeah. That's right. That's right. But in all sincerity, this staff has worked very hard to get to this point. They're not satisfied with where it is still, but we are where we said we would be in this month of October. We take that up tomorrow and look forward to the final day of reckoning, so to speak, in December. But this is the second most recent working draft. Senator Kyle.
Mr. Chairman, I've been here long enough to look around the room and see whether I think that folks can agree, and I think today we had real consensus on some issues. I don't know if we're going to get there on annexation. I'll say that. I don't know if you need to provide bonds for everyone if they come to the meeting. But what I do hope that, and I don't know if we can do that, but I do hope that we can seriously consider a recommendation in regards to the growth plans. And I want y'all to think about that. These things are going to expire in just a few years or have to be renewed, or there's a question as whether or not they should be renewed. They were created for 20 years, and 20 years is almost up. In my home county, I believe a reviewing of the growth plan would be a very positive thing. Things have changed. Developments that people thought were going to occur didn't. Things that people didn't think were going to develop did. So that's just from a personal note. We would be on a more solid ground in our community if other folks felt the same way too. And I just wanted to raise that for y'all's thought and your contention between now and the start of session.
Yeah, do recall that is the broader context in which we undertake this review and that report, and that's why there's so much in it. To be sure, the legislation that is pending concerning the issue of annexation and annexation by ordinance or referendum and so forth is one very important but discrete issue in the broader context of 1101 and how we doing 15 years in, because we still have those issues to grapple with. So think broadly as you look at this and anticipate. We're not voting on anything tomorrow per se on that report, but the staff needs guidance because they've just done a heck of a lot of work to get where we are so far, and it's in December where we're charged with responsibility for making some recommendations back to the General Assembly, which reconvenes in January. So in that context, I'll bid you adieu. We'll stand in recess till tomorrow at 8:30. Thank you very much.